I'm going to call the meeting to order. This is the December 13, 2017 Issaquah City Council Committee work session. This entire meeting is devoted to budget. This is our 7th budget work session. So we have one item on the agenda. It's council budget deliberations. Tola is excused tonight, and Mariah will be late. So we had some questions toward the end of our meeting on Monday, and I believe we are going to start with addressing the answers to those questions first before we move on to budget deliberations.
I think since we have the Parks Director, he is on his way. Perhaps. We would, maybe if we could have our Public Works Engineering Director come and talk about the capital project that was a question. Sheldon, if you would, the water treatment plant. Sure. So if we could start with that and then see if more of administrative staff arrives. Thanks.
Great, thank you.
Okay, just a briefing on the, okay. Thank you. So I'm Sheldon Lynn, Director of Public Works Engineering. As I understand it, the council had a question about the water treatment plant capital improvement project. It's in the budget for next year at just over $200,000. And that project is a project that is a multi-year project that its intent is to build a centralized water treatment plant for the city's wells, and as well as to set up the capability to blend the regional source with the well sources. You had a question, Paul?
Yeah, I asked
Okay.
the question, and I understand at a high level what the purpose of a water treatment plant is. My question was, why would we be authorizing capital for design? I think there was 3 descriptions in there in the CIP document, what got my attention, and let me open those. But design was one of those, and wow, $200,000 for something, and we haven't got the water plan yet, and that's up for reauthorization in this budget. So I'd always thought that in terms of order, intent would be that that water plan would inform, and we would discuss that, and that this may be one of the proposals from that. It seems like we're getting ahead with the water treatment plant.
Okay, so you're correct that you don't have the water system plan in front of you yet. The draft chapter that deals with the water treatment plant that is contained within there, the analysis shows that that water treatment plant needs to be online sometime between 2022 and 2026, based upon the rate of growth in the central Issaquah area primarily. What occurs is the demands increase as populations and commercial grow in this central Issaquah area, which is our initial pressure zone where all the supply exists. And so when that exceeds the capability of the wells to supply it, then we need to bring in regional water to be able to provide for that area, as well as other areas that are provided for the rest of the city as well. The time frame on that, based upon the draft information so far, and I just had a conversation via email with the consultants working on the draft plan, and they're saying that based on their analysis, the plant has to be online sometime between 2022 and 2026. It takes probably 5 to 8 years, beginning with design through the whole process, to be able to get a treatment plant online. The work next year is intended to start to do water quality pilot testing, starts to look more in depth at the water utility configurations, so we can start to begin looking for a location for the treatment plant. There's a lot that goes into preparation to get to the design. This is really, I'd call it preliminary design work for next year.
I'll repeat, again, I've always understood at that certain level this.
Yeah.
I'm questioning the fact that this is an item and we haven't discussed the water plan yet. It's a process question. And I don't know, so I have to look at my other colleagues on the council. Do I have a different understanding? Do you guys, anybody have a different understanding going into this than I did? Please enlighten me.
What policy decisions have been made about the water treatment plant and from the council? And what policy questions are there? For example, I mean, one of the questions, do we build one? I don't recall having those discussions. So I'm in the same place Paul is. I don't recall having these kind of discussions, and
So the basic policy question that is driving this water treatment plant is the land use decisions that have been made to increase the demands on the water supply system. The configuration of the system from an efficiency perspective, as well as addressing water quality treatment that we're doing today for both of our wells, both wells 1 and 2 and 4 and 5. Right now it's very inefficient. And so when we bring in the demands and we have to now blend the regional water with the local groundwater based upon demands from the land uses that have been adopted, it drives the need to start to deal with fluoridation and other things in the system as a whole. I don't think the council has made exact policy discussions or decisions on that, because one of the policy discussions during the design may be that the council wants to add a process within the system to remove fluoride from the regional water instead of leaving it in and blending it and fluoridating the whole city. And I'm using fluoride as an example because I think that's the one that people are most in tune with or concerned about. So it becomes that, but we need to be able to set up the utility so that we have an efficient treatment for the issues that we have today and prepare for tomorrow to be able to supply the city with the necessary water supply.
Mary Lou?
So I think, Sheldon, it's not about the need for it or not and whether that was a policy question. I think we were expecting to see a draft of a water system plan, some sort of document that sort of just said everything that you said and had graphics and showed us what path we're headed down. I think that's the piece that's missing. So we haven't had that, as far as I know, at infrastructure or at a work session. And so to see the plant here, I think what the expectation was we'd see the plan here first, and that the plan would be sort of understood by council, and then there'd be an ask to start working on the plant.
Right. The intent was that we would have that plan to you by the end of this year, but we ran into some delays. And we expect it to be in the first quarter next year of having the full plan in front of the council.
City council.
Oops. Okay, so is it a finalized plan in first quarter, or is it a draft plan that comes to council with some policy questions left to be answered?
It's going to be the plan in front of council that the council is going to be asked to review and approve. And that'll have, we're not planning any changes in policy. It's really the CAP, the capital component of it, dealing with the water treatment plant, is the policies are embedded within that project itself, not embedded within the plan. Now, if the council wants to add a policy, we can do that at the time the plan's in front of you. It's a draft plan for council's consideration.
So I guess what harm would be done if in the first quarter the plan is coming and then the ask for this capital comes as a budget adjustment in 2018 after council's looked at the plan?
I guess what it does is it just delays the work further on the water treatment plant, and by however much time that occurs, you know, it'll delay it by that amount of time. And it just puts a strain on, if your growth happens faster than anticipated in the central Issaquah, you could have some strain on your water supply in 2022. If it occurs at a slower rate, then you have till like 2026 or so. So it's really dependent upon how fast things are growing.
So I think the puzzling piece without seeing the plan is seeing how those growth projections tie into a capacity of a water treatment plant. And that's, I think, maybe the hang-up point, because those would be assumptions. The growth would be assumptions.
Okay.
Other questions? You have something else, Paul? We're
No questions of Sheldon at this time.
okay, because we still have deliberations on.
Yep.
Anything else?
That's it.
Okay.
Thanks. Okay. Next, looks like Jeff Watling is here.
Sure.
May I?
Sure.
Jeff, before you get started, I read the last amendment or change, addition that was made to the packet, and it doesn't quite address the question that I had.
Okay.
And my first one was around PK 012. We'll go by code. How's that? Right? You know, that is shown by in the capital plan. You know, its funding source. I'm going to ask you. I don't really mean to quiz you, but it's not. It assumes that there's going to be some type of bond, and
I don't believe it does.
or well, I'm just saying that is the.
Well, the description in the capital plan does?
Yeah, it's got debt bond issue, $500,000 for this project, and $250,000 county grant. I said, okay, so where's the bond coming from? And is there anything left from the old bond, or is this something new? That's my question.
Please. Jen Olson.
Thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that. That $500,000 is one of the projects that is considered in the unfunded category, and so I'll quickly pull that up. But it is not included in the prior year bond, and so what's in the budget is $1.6 million in a bond anticipation note, and that $500,000 is included in that total. As a temporary placement for those unfunded portions of capital projects.
Okay, so if I may, I'm going to repeat back what I think I heard, and you did remind, so there is, in the original CIP, there is an unfunded component of 2018. You're saying this is one of those line items, but we haven't discussed how to fund this at all.
Correct. The 2018 budget proposes that we would issue a bond anticipation note, and then as part of the following year.
I'm not familiar with the bond anticipation notes.
It would be like just a temporary bond where we would just pay some interest costs on that.
Council approval?
Yes, it would be essentially councilmatic bonds.
So it's a separate action than from what we're doing tonight.
Correct. We would have an agenda bill for that bond anticipation note.
So the action tonight is simply instructing the administration to bring such an agenda bill forward.
Mm-hmm. Yes, what that would do, I would envision in the council president's letter, is that maybe that would be one item where the administration would be directed to bring forward the agenda bill for the proposed bond anticipation note in 2018 for council to consider at that time. But the dollars would be in the 2018 budget pending that final action from the council.
Okay, thank you. So all that information was missing from me. Thank you. When it's just put as a line item, kind of in the document that we had, that kind of, and I went and looked at the CIP again. It just said debt obligation. Mm-hmm. So I understand that. So that was my question, Jeff. And then the second one is part of that, and I know what the park master plan, at least I thought I understood its scope. Now, if you look at this CIP item, it goes on for 3 years. And I know there's 2017 costs. We've got 18 and 19 costs in the CIP as well. Now, in your answer, and also in the CIP document itself, excuse me, it is a little bit confusing because it talks about Tibbetts. It's copy editing on there was maybe a little bit off. It just has a list of parks names. Tibbetts Valley Park is listed twice in succession. And then I read from here that there is what I take as kind of like the water treatment plant. It's assuming a certain policy decision by the council to go forward with something that's going to be recommended out of the strategic plan. That's what I think I'm seeing. So for everybody and for my council colleagues as well, what we have in front of us is a budget item. It's like, and just like the water treatment plant, it's asking for authorization to appropriate funds for an item that really still will require a policy vote by the council. That feels backwards to me in terms of procedurally. So I put then that in the same bucket as far as my concern as the water treatment plant. Okay, Jeff, it's all yours.
Yeah. No, thank you for that context. I think I'm not familiar with the water treatment discussion that just happened. The intent of this program and this item in the capital budget was knowing in the future years we are going to have some site-specific master planning that we're going to want to do. The intent in the narrative of the CIP and even the narrative of my response, Tibbetts Valley Park is mentioned. You're right, it's unfortunately mentioned twice. A little bit of a typo there. Off-leash dog park is mentioned, as well as some other parks. Those are really intended as examples. I think the importance of the framework of this program was knowing we don't have an adopted park strategic plan yet, but knowing we're going to want to jump right into some site-specific master planning as that park strategic plan is going to direct, or at least give us a sense of what those near-term priorities are. This is a funding request for specific projects that will be determined once the park strategic plan is adopted.
So I would also anticipate that once the park strategic plan is adopted, then during the course of that discussion, you would tell us, are the priorities on the page the ones that you want to pursue, or do you want to reorder them in some way? And you'd give direction to us about which park plan you would like to pursue next. And this is a placeholder. We knew the need was there to do parks planning. We have taken a little bit of a guess at what maybe the top 2, 3 might be percolating as, but we're waiting for you to review that plan and tell us, go and proceed with parks master planning on whatever park.
So this is money to implement the park strategic plan once it's adopted.
Yes, I think that's a great way to say it. One aspect of the implementation, the kind of design work that needs to happen.
And the public engagement that would be, again, site-specific for whatever those priority projects are.
Yeah. Thank you. I understand that. And having not gone through the development of a park strategic plan and then implementation, I assumed, without thinking about it until I heard this, that there would be proposals, there would be a roadmap. It'd be kind of like the CIP in the sense that there's here's the things we want to achieve, here's the sequence, here's their costs, and that we would get a chance to then respond to that. And I assumed that we would operationalize that by appropriating funds at some level that the council saw fit, whether it be for the entire thing or maybe for some class of projects or for a year or something. So this kind of jumps ahead on that. Asking us to appropriate this money now based upon this isn't the sequence in which I expected, though we never really sat down and detailed it out.
So I can understand that concern or the fact that it's a different approach. What I would say is we have tried to approach our CIP development in a different way this year, where we've tried to identify those ongoing needs. Planning or design is one of those, and try to bundle up projects in a different way. It's true, we're sort of out of sequence here, and we debated that multiple times, but we also didn't want to show a lack of thought, a lack of awareness that indeed the Parks Master Plan was going to identify a need to do some renovations or park planning. So there's certainly ways as we review the Parks Plan to make modifications to the amount that's budgeted. The budget is a planning tool, so we can go back and revise that planning estimate.
Other questions about that? About the answer? Bill, do you have something?
Yeah, so I guess just want to chime in, I'm having the same problem also here with the process. And just to expand it, and as I read through here, I'm seeing that as on the budget, that's non-voted debt fund. That's what you're trying to call that, right? So it's, yeah, Councilmanic. So that's the way it's written in actual budget, non-voted debt fund. I want to make sure I'm looking at the right line. So in Parks, there's $500,000, and then also in the Street Capital Projects Fund, there's $1,150,000, and the Parks one the same way for funding of projects that it's asking for funding that we don't have funding for, actually, right? And we haven't, because we haven't voted for that almost $1.7 million worth of funding. Right?
I just wanted to point out that the funding sources for the project PK029, Park Master Planning, those funding sources are not identified to come from bonds. They're identified to come from REIT, mitigation dollars, and there is an outlier or a future year project that identifies some grant dollars. So this specific project funding sources are not out of the anticipated, or any bonds are identified for these expenditures.
So, and that's where you look in here, and then you got to go back and forth to a lot of documents to try to track where all this is, and because it's scattered in those capital funds of funding we don't actually have, but anticipating that we will approve. Right?
One way to look at the capital budget is project-based, and so that's why it identifies multiple sources. The budget is fund-based, and so that's where we bridge the capital investments, and we put in only those expenditures or those sources at the fund level, the ins and the outs. But for the capital piece of it, the actual project, that's where we have identified all of the different funding sources, and then there may be funds that have, in some cases, not all, where you see the Streets Capital Project Fund, that's where the expenditures are for just street or transportation projects. And so it can be confusing, but capital budget is project-based, the regular operating budget is fund-based.
Just to follow up on that a little bit, Jen, I think the linkage piece that's hard to see this year, thank you for answering and saying that at least the project we were talking about earlier is not debt funded, because I think that was confusing. So I think the council members are looking for, when we look at it and we see that some of it is going to be debt funded, it's hard to go back then to the capital improvement plan and see exactly what are we funding with debt and what are we funding with other sources. So what might be helpful next year when we have it, even though we've done a CIP, is to have a schedule in the back that tracks back to these numbers in a shorter way. Because I think I don't think Bill would be so much concerned if he knew that certain ones of these projects were being funded by sources that we have, versus what are we using debt to fund? What are we using our parks bond to fund? What are we using councilmanic debt to fund? I think that's where he'd like to understand exactly what the debt is getting, project by project.
We could also pull up some additional information that was provided at a previous work session that was the line item detail for the capital projects funds, and we could certainly pull that information up as well to review that if the council would like.
I'm fine with it.
So I think that has been provided.
Yeah, just not as part, when I say schedule, I guess what I mean is sometimes I feel like there's a few cheat sheets that we could put in the back that are only one page long that might be able to help some council members track back and forth between things. But yes, it's been provided. We don't have it open now. We don't have our CIPs with us. But I think that was getting to Bill's question is what's the debt for? What's the debt for in this one? And then the answer to the question on the specific project, at first blush, it sounded like this was being funded through debt, and that's not correct. It is funded through other sources.
And I can pull that document up.
Oh, no, that's okay. The answer's
It's a
fine.
one-page document just to show the projects that are identified as unfunded, or it will just show the unfunded portion of the debt, and that's something that we can easily pull up to make sure we're answering those questions.
Just to be clear, a little real about the funding source here because the CIP does list mitigation in REIT 1. So, and that's why I keep mentioning the ID numbers because I just have two different documents open on my machine and I just search for the ID number and boom, I'm there right away. So it's pretty easy to track that way. But it is clear in there. So Jen, what you just said, absolutely, read a mitigation fund for the park one. Again, mine was more about process and procedure. And I got to tell you, we had a conversation on Monday night about potentially authorizing positions but not funding them. This almost feels like kind of reverse. Let's also authorize certain funds, but actually we still have to go through and say okay to the projects. And so that's how that feels to me. I'm just working to understand that. I know we'll get to deliberate them on a line item basis in a moment.
Other questions of Jeff? Okay. Thanks, Jeff. Oh, I do have one more question, Jeff, sorry. Can you, since we're all here, let us know the schedule for PROST, the Parks and Recreation, whatever it's called?
Park Strategic
Space and
Plan.
Trail.
Thanks.
Parks and
Yeah, abbreviated. Yeah, absolutely. Excuse me, clear my throat. We actually have a park board meeting next Tuesday night. At that meeting, we are taking the strategic projects that we've identified, the 40-some strategic projects, and we are going through an exercise to identify prioritization, near-term, mid-term, long-term. From that work on Tuesday, we anticipate putting this draft document together and likely first or second week of January having a draft document out. It's our intent to have that draft document available to the public to view and take a look at, have a park board meeting in January, have likely a public meeting that we would host in early February to garner more feedback on that draft document that is out, and then ideally have the park board begin their recommendation process at their meeting in February, and then ready to start the adoption process with council sometime in March. So.
Great. Thank you.
You got it.
Okay. I think the next question that council asked is just a little overview of finance and Parks and Rec reorgs, so we're going to go through that quickly.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thanks.
All right, real quick overview of the restructuring. I know we talked about this in November. Apologize, I wouldn't want to call this an org chart. I think at best I would describe this as a sort of a staff alignment core services chart. In real broad terms, to give the overview again, within Parks and Recreation, we took a real close look throughout this year at our core functions and how our core functions are aligned. The restructuring that we're looking at is how to reorganize our existing staff with no new FTEs. So no new FTE requests in this budget. This is really about how to reposition and organize our staff. One of the key goals within the Park Planning and Development Group, where we have a staff of 1 historically, we're going to increase that to 2 FTEs by taking one of our recreation managers and aligning them over to Park Planning and Development. That allows us to shift, in a way, flatten our Recreation Services Group, where we'd have 4 supervisors that would be reporting to our Deputy Director directly. It just allows us to equitably distribute our leadership team within the department.
Looks to me like an administrative issue. We had the same kind of conversation about Jen's department 2 nights ago. And we were told the reason it's coming this way is because some of the positions are actually, what are they called again? Reclassifications. I cannot remember that. And I don't know. So embedded within this is perhaps a policy question for the council about authorization of the reclassifications, and this is the justification for them. She's nodding yes.
You're nodding, Emily, so I'm going to...
Yeah, I would say that's accurate. Council authority is at approving titles and salary ranges, right. And to some degree the FTE count between those classifications. So what we are doing is we're taking our existing staff and we're making a few changes from one column to the next, not adding new staff, and as I said last time, this at this moment is not coupled with a budget request, added dollars. Right. But for example, in the park planning and development side, we're actually adding an individual, taking that individual from the recreation services side of the house. So it's a reallocation of our resources. So in part, we're bringing that forward to tell you that so that you can understand that as we go forward, we're kind of adjusting our focus to try to meet needs of the community, in particular with the park planning and development. It's indicated as new up there. But your ask is please approve that reclassification or the new headcount in that title.
Thank you for that very much. I love the transparency and the extent and the thoughtfulness of the justification. I guess then will we know the question that we'll vote on later? Okay.
Bill?
Yeah, so a reclassification could, I mean, you're saying 1 FTE, but for me, there's a lot of, excuse me, differences on, that could be reclassified to a way higher position, a way lower position, whatever, and that hasn't been discussed to give us some framework on that. You said there's no change in funding either, so it's reclassification for a different job, but in the same scale of pay and so forth? Are we moving people up and down and around as well?
Part of that's going to be answered as we finish our class comp work, which is in progress right now. It's to a degree it's lateral, but we're going to wait until we finish the class comp work to be able to come back to you, because it's not just about that one individual that we're adjusting. It'll be for that whole classification that may need to be adjusted, and I can't answer the question right now about whether that's up or down.
Okay, after that, but at this point in time, is it in the same?
It's close. It's not a huge jump up, and it's not a huge decrease either. So what we're trying to do is keep that current employee who we'd like to retain, achieving the same salary level. Classification that he was in now and the classification he's moving to are fairly similar, but as I said, how similar, what exact pay, that's something that's in progress right now.
And you wouldn't do this maneuver until after the classification is done?
No, we would transition to this system. Yes.
And then you'd figure out.
Yes, as we're doing across the city, we would come back and tell you, here's our class comp work. These are all the adjustments that we think we need to make to our classification and comp system.
So in a sense, just not get too deep, but that employee is going into a job that they don't know what they're really going to be, if it's going to be a lateral or an up or a down, is what you're telling me.
I would say just looking at the market and knowing the profession, it's it's really close to a lateral, if not a lateral. I think, as Emily, to reiterate what Emily says, the class and comp study and analysis is going to confirm that, but it's not a dramatic swing.
Yeah, and I would just add that we've had that, one-on-one conversation with that employee. So, it's unfair to do this kind of work and not be able to give some assurance to the employees. So we have done that, but as we are doing with all employees right now, we are saying there could be some adjustment in the future based on the class comp work.
I have a question. Is this kind of reorganization is this typically policy? Is it or is it all administrative? I'm just.
It's administrative, but I think for the sake of transparency, to make sure that we're not grossly out of alignment with your expectations and goals for the community and how you think we can meet service demands, we wanted to highlight it for you.
Okay, and I appreciate it as well because there was an instance a few years ago where it wasn't highlighted like this, and there were questions later. And so I believe that's the reason that you're being so transparent, and I do appreciate it as well.
Great, thanks.
Anything else for Jeff? No? Okay. Can we kick Jeff out? Is that what you asked me? Yeah. You're out of here.
All right. The next department reorganization is the finance department proposed reorganization. This is in similar format. Again, not org chart, but defined under kind of the core services concept. So Jeff and I teamed up to create documents that were consistent for reviewing with the council for what we're doing. The finance department reorg model is basically key to 3 division managers. And prior to my arrival, the current structure was a lot of the positions that you see in some of the core services lanes or divisions were reporting directly to the finance director. Not all positions consistent to reporting to the deputy director were in alignment. And so what we did was conduct a bit of a mini workforce assessment. We looked at those core services to ensure that we were providing great levels of service to the community and to the internal and external stakeholders that we have. And so that's why you see those divisions of accounting and purchasing, revenue and treasury, budgeting and forecast, and then there's the general financial administration. The primary change is those shifts to key division managers, and so the HR department assisted us with doing a mini looking at the market to come up with what we call financial operations managers. Again, as Emily identified, that these will still be part of the class and compensation study, but as the market tells us that these are pinpointed in, and so we're confident that these classifications would stay the same, and certainly, as with all of the positions, would be adjusted up or down accordingly. Employees have been notified. We've had great candid conversations about this change, so I just wanted to point out that in the planning effort, we did identify potential future positions, and that's in the gray, because we wanted to say long-term we may look at new positions, but time will tell that as we work on our efficiencies through our Munis implementation and other information system implementations, some of the other new applications. So in 2018, the key division managers shift from a deputy director to a financial operations manager covering the accounting and purchasing division, a senior accountant shifting to a financial operations manager focusing on budget and forecasting, and then the financial services supervisor shifting to financial operations, or what you'll hear often is the revenue manager. And so that is identified for 18, as well as we have a new ask that we talked about on Monday night for a new accountant, and that is the new position proposed starting in mid-year. And so with that, the current allocation fund-wise for the finance department, and you'll see this as we go through more updates to our cost allocation plan. The finance department budgets are spread amongst a number of different funds. And so that is a confusing piece, but we will be dialing that in similar to the IT fund, where we'll bring that back in, and then we'll charge out financial services to those who directly receive them based on a level of methodology. So the overall cost for the restructure piece actually offsets the cost of the new position, as well as the new costs for existing staff for COLA adjustments, benefit premium changes, and other contractual obligations. So an overall increase of all salary and benefits of about $113,000. However, the new position is 68 of that, offset by the restructure changes of about $30,000, and then the remainder of that is for all of the staff in the finance department for any step increases, cost of living, or other obligations. So with that, I would be happy to answer any more questions about the finance department restructure.
Bill?
So again, on a similar note, just it looks like from titles that some people are moving up and some people are moving down, and you had some numbers thrown out there very quickly, combined with a bunch of other numbers. So the simpler question is, these three main movements right here that are listed, what's the dollar cost in the change of those three titles?
That's actually a decrease overall from one year to the next, a budget decrease of about $30,000.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions about this? Okay, I think we're done with that topic.
Thank you.
Where we left off.
We are back to the deliberations list. As part of my memo for the council work session agenda packet, I included the latest update of the budget highlights and deliberations list, as well as the summary revenues, expenditures, and impact on fund balance as we move towards the final budget adoption. And then there were anything that, I think those are the two documents that were in there. What I'd like to do, if the council is agreeable to, there are a number of housekeeping line items, or what I would consider more of a fund accounting cleanup, or those items, I'd like to point those out, and if those would be items that we could address right away, and then we could get back to wherever the council would want to go in the red font. Sure. Those are the lines that still need council discussion. So if that's okay?
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to bring your attention, I'll start at the top of the budget deliberations sheet. There are, under the revenue category, there are two new revenues, a small amount for the E911 escrow draw and purchasing card rebate. The E911 escrow draw is intended to offset the new position, I wanted to point that out, for the police communications supervisor that will be part of the 2018 budget. And this was something that the chief had identified as a way to shift us into is over a 3-year period is to draw some funds that are available, and we are proposing that we would request $160,000 to help offset this position.
And could you describe a little bit about what the escrow is and why it's available and why we wouldn't just recommend using general fund?
Well,
it says general, but it says escrow.
It is. It would be a revenue source coming into the general fund, and so that's where we identified the fund column there is the fund budget that you're addressing tonight. And so those E911 escrow dollars are the amount that is charged to residents on the phone bill, and so that money goes into this account, and we can use that for things like personnel, capital outlay, and so the chief identified this for this new position that was being added to help smooth us into a new position that would be an ongoing expenditure.
Smooth this in, so it's not going to be the source to fund the position in the future?
Correct. We're recommending a 3-year. So in the 1920 biennial budget, you'll see a larger dollar amount. You'll see the breakout by year, but we'll be, I believe, 19 will be 120,000 in a revenue source, and then in 2020 you'll see approximately 80,000 as a revenue source. So we're essentially skimming down that draw from the escrow account.
And so what's the rationale for that? How do we know in the future we can just afford it and now we have to kind of smooth it?
That was just a strategy to help with the general fund. One of our parameters were to provide a proposed budget that did not impact negatively the general fund, and so this was a small piece to help get us there. And so again, that was a strategy that the departments and administration thought would be something that the council may be agreeable to.
What are other items that have been used for that fund, or other, when we're not taking as much out here, what are the things would you be using it for?
I'm going to have city administrator help with some historical.
So we have the current IT person that's assigned to the 911 system that gets paid out of that 911 fund. Any related expenses to the dispatch center, for example, that gets paid out of that 911 fund as well. So I think what we saw here was a larger cash balance that could be utilized to help fund this position. The potential could be that over time, you know, it may be able to fund it long term too. We just don't know yet. Part of that is uncertainty involved with the 911 committee that's studying all dispatch centers and the distribution of those funds into the future.
Thank you.
What's the name of the fund these escrow funds sit in? Is it earmarked in the?
That is not in the city funds. We would get that from the county. So this is a source into the general fund.
Okay, so in that way, it's similar to LTAC.
Correct.
So we can choose to use those funds or not?
Yeah. So we draw that on that every year, and then if we have left, it ends up in this escrow account. So it's dedicated to our dispatch center, and we have some flexibility in terms of the use of that.
Okay.
And a follow-up question. So I didn't know that the escrow fund was not one that we were looking at, that it was external. Are there any other external funds that we're drawing on for this smoothing, or to meet the goal of not using general fund balance? And also, where else have we drawn this year to do this smoothing? And then what's the total amount that we're using from a series of different places to smooth this year?
I don't have that level of detail to provide you, but this would be under the category of intergovernmental or shared revenues that come into the fund from a variety of places, the county, the state, and so those would be examples, and we could certainly provide the information you will see in the budget where we have a dollar amount that's identified as shared revenues or intergovernmental, and so that level of detail is something that we'd have to provide the council at a future meeting.
Okay, that's fine for the money that's coming from elsewhere. If we were not to be using that strategy, one example being the E911 escrow drawdown, how much are we using to smooth the general fund balance this year from little sources, either within our own reserves or within the reserves that are outside of the city?
We'd have to take a look at, let me pull up the summary page for the general fund. On page 36 of the budget,
Yep.
mid-page, you can see that there is a category for intergovernmental or shared, and there are some groupings. So you can see that we receive dollars from the state, from federal grants, state grants, and then other public safety dollars. Part of the 160 is part of the 280 you'll see in the 2018 column, but the level of detail that in the detailed line items for these shared dollars, we'd have to get for you. So we're looking at the 1.9 million in intergovernmental shared sources for 2018.
And I guess the question is trying to get at, I understand the strategy you're using, I just can't quantify it. So if we were not to do this, if we were to prepare a budget with a strategy similar to last year, would that mean a $2 million drawdown in the general fund that we're not seeing now? It's not that straightforward.
No, it's not that straightforward because the largest portion of this category comes from grant dollars that we anticipate. So really the amounts such as this, the 160, if the council chooses not to draw down in 2018, then it may affect and put the budget into an impacting or use of ending fund balance as part of the final budget.
A simple way to look at those intergovernmental shared is you can see from the previous, you can see from the amended revenues and the projected revenues. I can tell you that history is fairly common as you look back over previous years, and you're going to see some amount of state and local grants, some amount of federal grants, et cetera. So I think the real difference here is that one item or the 280 column.
Thank you.
And maybe I missed it, but that's more than one item, the 280? Sorry, what is that being used for, the 280?
I'd have to pull up the line item detail to get the other pieces of the other public safety dollars.
This is the one we're talking about here, and the other one, you don't have that detail. Or are there one or more? Okay. So is this something that we need to thumbs up or thumbs down?
Yes, please. Yes.
Okay, so we're into deliberations. Do you have other questions, comments? Thoughts you want your fellow council members to hear before we take a vote? Okay, so we're going to do our thumbs up, thumbs down. Thumbs up means $160,000 from the E911 escrow draw.
Stays in the budget.
Stays in the budget. Thumbs up means it stays in the budget. Okay, you have questions now? What?
Did I hear risk over there that the other 120 for the console and the equipment and so forth?
Yeah, so there's some additional equipment that would go into the 911 center that was being funded out of that 280. It's part of a standard kind of draw we take out of there for the systems.
And my last question would be approximately what is that a year, that 911 fund has been historically, how much per year?
I'd have to pull the detail. I mean, if you wish, I can pull that and get it to you. I don't have it.
Just looking for an approximate. You know, is it in the 50,000 range or 500,000 range or?
So the position is an annual, so we know that.
Right.
And then it depends on what improvements need to be made for the year. So it's hard to, I can't give you an answer that I would know was reasonably correct.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to do a thumbs up, thumbs down if there aren't any more questions or comments. And a thumbs up means that you would keep the 160 in the budget. Okay, 1, 2, 3, go. Okay, unanimous. The next, purchasing card rebate.
Yes, the purchasing card rebate will be a new program that the administration is going to be bringing for all departments. This is one of our efficiencies tasks to undertake. What this means is that our U.S. Bank has a state contract for commercial cards. Purchasing cards is one of them. So this essentially gives authorized employees, they would have a purchasing card. They would be responsible for that card. They would make purchases according to purchasing policy and financial procedures. And so this is just a way to bring in the accounting information on those purchases electronically into Munis, and then approve those purchases, report on it. And so what this does is the more we use the card based on policy and procedures, the more of a rebate that we get. And so one of the things that's nice is that this is a small source of revenue that we can utilize in the general fund. It helps offset financial services that we provide. And so it has been added in, this is one of those kind of housekeeping items that getting into this program is an improvement that a number of cities have utilized, a good way for best practices in purchasing. And so the nice thing that goes with it is that we have a rebate to that. There is no cost for the service. So it's just a nice to have.
Do you think of any reason we would not do this?
There is not that I can see.
Questions for Jen on this one? Are you ready to vote? Okay, thumbs up means that you approve $150,000 to come into the general fund from the purchasing card rebate new program. Is that right?
That's correct.
1, 2, 3, go.
Thank you. Okay. Another housekeeping item is, and in the blue highlights in this sheet, as you're...
I'm sorry. Can I go back one? The $150,000. I assume that's just a projection.
It is a projection. We're hopeful that we'll be able to implement the program early in the year, and so we'll bring back reports to the council, and you'll see that in quarterly reports about how we're doing. Again, the more we use it, the more of a rebate.
Thanks.
All right, the next item that is more housekeeping in nature, the blue highlighted lines were, as the council remembers, items that had come up after the proposed budget was created. This is one of those, and this is a transfer in to the general fund from the art fund to offset the cost of the arts-related position. Previously, this position had been budgeted for in the art fund. However, it is now in the executive department fund, and so what we're doing here is some fund accounting corrections that needed to be made, and so we found that a transfer in from the special revenue fund to the general fund was in order, and so we're proposing that the council would accept this new addition. This would be an add to the proposed revenues of $40,000, and so that will help the bottom line, the ending fund balance overall in the final budget.
Questions about it? Sounds like it's an accounting correction.
It is an accounting correction. What we wanted to do for these items, because we want to reflect accurate revenues in the final budget, and so we wanted to be transparent about what we had missed in the proposed budget, and this is one of those line items.
Any questions? Okay, ready to vote? Thumbs up means that you approve the $40,000 accounting correction. 1, 2, 3, go.
Thank you.
Unanimous.
I am going to quickly I wanted to, another line item, this is under the maintenance and operations. This is in regards to the Eastside Fire and Rescue partner amount that there are council member liaisons that sit on the board that have gone through the Eastside Fire and Rescue budgeting process, and the $275,000 we wanted to be transparent about the increase for 2018. So this is another one of those that would be somewhat housekeeping in nature. However, it is a major expenditure, and so we wanted to have the council make sure that you were aware that we were seeing an increase in the fire department expenditures.
We have not lots of choices. So, okay. Approving the expenditure is a thumbs up. 1, 2, 3, go. Okay.
All right, thank you. With that, then, those are ones that I would see that we kind of quickly were able to have a dialogue about, and so if we wanted to kind of finalize the revenue category, if that's acceptable. The 2018 budget, and I'm going to refer to the budget page for the budget page 79. This is the Limited Debt Service Fund number 205. It's otherwise known as either the non-voted debt fund or the councilmanic debt fund. The difference between these two funds, if you take a quick peek at page 78 of the budget, Debt Service Fund 200, which is voter approved. The reason that we separate these debt service funds is because one is voter approved and one is councilmanic that does not have voter approval. Other differences in the funds is that in the voter approved, you would see a revenue source of taxes. That is the excess levy. That comes directly from the taxpayers to this fund to pay the debt service that the voters approved. So back to page 79 of the budget, this revenue identifies the bond anticipation note, and we talked briefly about that when we were talking about those capital budgets, but this is the fund look at the debt service fund, and so I wanted to walk you through this budget. The revenue sources are identified as debt services, and so this would be the bond proceeds if we were to issue a temporary bond. It's referred to as a BAN or a bond anticipation note, and that source amount is $1.6 million. The other source of funds coming to this fund comes from the general fund, and that is for existing debt service, the $2,075,000. That's the total sources in this fund. The outflow for this fund is, again, debt service on the expenditure side, and that is the existing principal and interest payments for our existing obligations of $2,077,430. The transfers out of $500,000 to the streets capital project fund and the $1.15670 to the park capital project fund total the bond anticipation note of $1,656,870. So this is essentially a pass-through fund to issue bonds and transfer those bond proceeds out to pay for the project in the capital project funds. And so you'll see in those capital project funds, you'll see a transfer in of $500,000 in the street capital Projects Fund, and you'll see a transfer in the Park Capital Project Fund of the 1.156. So this is part of the unfunded debt, and I wanted to bring up that information. So. So this page that I've brought up is part of the capital improvement plan. It is page 18 of that budget document, that capital budget document. This is the debt funding piece and identifies the projects that have a partial unfunded component to it. And in some cases, it may be all of it. But for the 2018 through 2022 CIP, these are the projects that are identified as needing some support from a potential bond issue. And so you can see in 2018, we've identified 3 projects. That is the Creekside and sensitive land purchases of $500,000, the Front Street streetscape component of $156,870, and the Northwest Sammamish Road, or otherwise known as the Pinch Point, of $1 million, that totaling $1.656870. So those are the projects that come into play for the budget fund 205 for those proceeds that would come in from that bond and those transfers out to those capital project funds. What the administration has identified as a temporary funding source, you'll see down below in the debt service concept scenario, where we anticipate we could issue this temporary bond, pay some interest only for 1 year, and then we would bring this forward in an agenda bill. But also I wanted to jump forward into 2019 because we would be looking at the some projects, and one of those include the Provident Point intersection improvement, where we need approximately $8.1 million for those projects. So what we would want to do then is kind of true up or issue, you know, kind of the final bonds, and so that's why we would do the temporary in 2018, but issue new debt in 19 because it would be a larger debt service issue. We get more favorable interest rates on larger bonds, and so that is just a strategy for issuing debt for some of these unfunded projects.
Questions?
Yeah, so I think there's a little bit of art in what you do here, right, in trying to find the sources. So right now you show that 3 of them need some funding. But and I know as you look at some of these and you're finding funding for certain ones and whatever, and some funds can't be moved around so much, they're designed for projects, but other ones I think are more flexible. So the question comes to my mind of how these 3 are the ones showing the debt required versus maybe some other ones that could be used to show the debt going to them as well, right? It could be, you know, I say maybe not all of them, but many other ones, that debt part could show on many different projects. We're short the amount of money, we're short the 1.6 or whatever, but which project it shows on, the question is how you decided on these 3, and could it be on other ones just as easily, just depending?
It certainly could. When we go through the capital improvement planning process, the departments, you know, they're looking at estimates for the projects, and so they have to look at all of the potential sources, and so they know that perhaps certain projects are eligible for grant dollars. There are certain in capital investments that we can use REIT or mitigation dollars. And so that's why we come to this unfunded piece, because, you know, that's typically the leverage that a municipality can use in order to fund their capital budget.
Right, and we can go around in circles there. What I'm trying to say is that there's some general fund money in some of these projects. There's some other REIT money that could have been shifted to say, oh, this project's funded, and instead of putting this one, we could have put it in this one, and this other project would have shown as unfunded, having an unfunded portion. That's what I'm trying to get to, that if that's a correct statement.
So maybe, I would say maybe.
To some extent, I know there's some mixing, but.
So just look at those 3 projects that have the debt, right? So 1 million was a direction by council to fund the pinch point. And I think at that time, we said, we don't know how much it's going to cost. So so there's 2 options I would suggest on that. One is earmark $1 million out of the general fund balance, and that's $1 million cash, or what we did, which was put $1 million in a bond anticipation note. A bond anticipation note simply is, at some point down the road, we're going to issue a 20-year bond, whether it's a parks bond or a general bond or whatever. And all this does is, it's a very short-term instrument, usually for 1 year, and then you have the option, you have to make the interest payment on it. But in future years, you can carry that for a period of time and just do interest only. If you want to make a principal payment, when you renew the note, you can renew it for a slightly smaller amount. So $1 million in there was because we were uncertain. The other one, $500,000, we know we have a property we want to acquire. We've talked about it before. We'll be talking a little bit more about it Monday evening. And that same thing. You could use, general fund reserve, or you could add it to that. And then in anticipation of a future parks bond, council hasn't put one forth on the ballot, but certainly in the future that could be rolled into that. And then I can't see the
Front streetscape.
Oh, yes. So same thing. And that we had a little bit of conversation when we adopted capital budget. We didn't arrive. It varied all the way from let's do it all, which is $500,000, like $550,000, to let's do it in phases. So I think that was the phased approach, and that could be funded in a different way too. Any of those could. I think the $1 million, though, is one that likely won't be spent next year, but we wanted to meet the council obligation to put it into the budget, and then it's just a matter of, do you do a set aside, or do you just, from an accounting basis, that's all it is. So when we think about issuing the band, it's not going to be issued come January, because all those items are going to require some level of thought. The other alternative is you could just do it in-house and just you could borrow from the fleet fund, like an internal fund transfer, and then the utility fund or the fleet fund would just view it as a investment instrument, and they get paid interest. So you don't even have to pay a bank if you chose not to, if you wanted to show it from that perspective. Because the fleet fund, I think, off the top of my head, probably has the cash. There's like $10 million in that.
That's correct.
Account. So that's another option too.
So I have a different question. Mm-hmm. Those 2 projects. One, the Front streetscape, those are the ones we're talking about, right? That one says, so sorry, start at the top, wait. It's the 3. There's 3 of them that make up that 1.6, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so the first one, Creekside and sensitive land purchases, it says desirable. Here. You go down to Front streetscape, it says acceptable, and then Northwest Sammamish Road says deferrable. Mm-hmm. And we're going to talk about these categories briefly again later on when I mention one idea for moving through the capital list a little more quickly if the council desires. Mm-hmm. So deferrable says project is in conflict with a master plan or for which there are serious need, cost, justification, or timing questions. So I bring this up not only because we haven't been through this process before. We have a capital plan that we approved, and my understanding is we get to the point where capital planning, for lack of a better way of describing it, that becomes a sort of an easier thing to decide during budget, because we've sort of decided already what the capital needs are. We've looked at the timing, and there may be issues that come up. There may be last-minute issues. There may be some changes that we don't know about. I realize usually the capital budget means that we're pretty well fixed on what we're going to do financing-wise for our capital. So, just because we've never had this before, I want to know why, and we have an opportunity to ask now, why would Northwest Sammamish Road be on here for $1 million in 2018 if it's deferrable?
This was in the proposed capital budget when the council was deliberating that part of it. This was a council-directed change. This project had been identified out in future years, and it had not been in 2018. And so it was a direction to shift $1 million into 2018. Yes.
Yeah, that's the pinch point project.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
The traffic signal, so
It doesn't say pinch point.
Yes. The traffic signal, and we'll obviously have to talk to the mayor-elect.
Of course, I knew all that. I just wanted to keep watching.
The mayor-elect next year, but the Central Park traffic signal, I mean, one of the things that we thought is we could tap into that pedestrian safety fund. Essentially, the speed camera has about 800,000 in there, and we generate about 600,000 a year into that fund. And so our thinking was in next year's budget, we'd have enough to get that traffic signal done, which would be a great project to get done and get funded. It just takes 2-3 years to kind of get that done. And then the last one, it's deferrable because we haven't talked about, unless the council chooses to put it in now, we haven't talked about how we want to fund transportation long term.
Thank you. So
from that, because of some of the next conversations about the capital projects in those chunks for desirable, acceptable, and deferrable, what I would recommend then, because this is the funding source for the 2018, and so if you choose to keep those into the budget, this then would turn into more of a fund accounting, or that if those projects are removed from the budget, the funding would be removed too, because we would then update the capital budget and we wouldn't need it. So they are tied together. So if that is something we can wait, but that was the last revenue piece in the deliberations list. Okay.
Sure.
So the other day, is it Monday? I don't believe we got through all of our higher level policy questions, and 2 of those were, and this is what I can't remember. Do we go back to those and talk about the increased amount of REIT and the increased amount of mitigation that we're using? Not project by project, but in general, like on page 90 on the budget. Do we answer those questions before we go to the capital project list?
Yeah, we weren't going to go to that.
The policy question, I think I recall came up when we had a Q&A response, and the administration then brought back those projects that were utilizing REIT and were utilizing mitigation, and I could pull those projects up again. And so this is somewhat connected this is connected to the budget, because those are the dollar amounts that are proposed in those funds. So in a sense, then we would be tackling the REIT fund and the mitigation fund on the level of funding that has been proposed. So that's how that would connect to these policy questions is, are you okay with what has been proposed for funding sources for various projects out of the REIT and mitigation funds?
Sure, Marilyn.
So, Jen, on page 90, where we talk about the street capital project fund and we look at the REIT and the mitigation for there, I guess what I want to understand is, if we were not increasing funding from REIT from 1.5 million to 4.8 million and mitigation from $500,000 to 2.2 million, what would our strategy have looked like? Would it have been out of ending fund balance, multiple sources? Because they're huge jumps, 3 times for REIT and 4 times as much for mitigation fund. What would the options have been if we chose not to go that way?
So defer. Just don't do those capital projects.
Oh, defer the work.
Yeah.
There weren't other sources.
Yeah.
Okay,
That
so
was it.
we're getting more work done because we're going to go and use more, 3 times as much of one and 4 times, and that's why we're getting the work done this year. Otherwise, we wouldn't do the work.
Yep.
Okay.
To follow on, and so that's the essence of this, in that almost by an implied policy in the past, because I don't think we've actually had the question in front of us to say what type of ratios or amounts to use out of REIT as a policy question. What's different this year is, I mean, this is going to draw that account down pretty far. And I've always looked, the way I look at this is we actually have a pretty ambitious capital plan. And we get things started in 2018 because we're proposing to use this much REIT, and I want to talk about mitigation in a moment. That gives us runway. It also kind of starts things, some commitments perhaps, but it also gives us then runway to work on what those other funding sources need to be for subsequent years. So I kind of look at this as, it gets things started, buys us some time, but we're kind of, horses, well, not all the projects are starting. It's not a firm commitment to things that don't start in 2018. It's actually not a commitment to them at all. But that's the way I view this. So this is just a strategy, and that's why you're asking this question. We're going deep so that we can get things going, and we have time to figure out the rest of the funding.
Yep, it comes back to that. One of the first decisions I think council voted on the deliberations list was let's make a commitment to the administration council to talk about long-term capital funding in 2018. So that's a good.
Yeah, Bill.
Yeah, and then just to reiterate for folks, I'm sure, the REIT funding and the mitigation funds is money that's there. We can choose to use it this year or not, and we could then push it to 2019 projects or whatever ones it qualifies for, right? So by taking that chunk now, we're just prioritizing 18 projects over 19 or beyond projects, because if this is money, if we don't use it, just waits for us to use next year, right? It's ours, so that we're just prioritizing heavy use now. So what folks won't see is how much is going to be in there next year in those funds for us to use.
So we had that one conversation because you pointed out, you may recall, we budget, I think, $3 million out of, was it $3 million out of REIT? And then we hit, like the land sale that was on, the Atlas, for example, sale generates about $650,000 that we know today that actually isn't reflected in the revenue. It's going to end up, you want to talk a little bit about that? It ends up in the cash balance for that account.
Those larger land sales that we would not have put into just the regular known REIT sources on an annual basis would go into the ending cash ending fund balance. Another thing that I wanted to point out is in the capital budget, and part of the new changes to that capital process is that there is the funding section that has a 5-year cash flow analysis. And so you'll see, and again, cash flows are snapshots in time for what we know, and it is informed by the capital budget. So we anticipate for REIT, we have a stable source of revenue, or we can see from historical. So in our cash flow analysis and in our funding analysis, we put that into the capital budget so that we could show that not all the REIT is going to be used in that one capital investment year. You can see then the ending balance goes to the next year beginning balance, those projects that are 2019 that would be utilizing REIT or mitigation. But one of the new features that we put into the capital budget was those cash flow for these significant sources of revenue for capital investment.
I'm not exactly sure where we are, so.
We're at the policy questions, and I think that Bob mentioned that this kind of is connected to that future discussion on long-term funding of our transportation projects.
Yes.
Yes.
Which one are we?
8.
Okay.
8, yes, we're on 8 for the REIT.
So I guess sorry, I'm not clear. So what we have been doing is we have the policy questions, and then we flip over to the deliberations list. Are we still doing that, or are
This one is also kind of similar to the debt funding, that when we're talking about the capital project expenditures, if something gets pulled out that has a source of either REIT or mitigation, then we would adjust the budget accordingly, take that source out, and so it is connected, but there's multiple projects for these two policy
Yes.
questions.
Agreed.
Okay.
Yeah, I understand that.
So I'm just looking on page 25 of our budget summary, where you can see the totals of what the estimated beginning fund balance, revenues, expenditures, and estimated ending fund balance are for REIT and mitigation. They're like the 4th and 5th line down under special revenue funds. And what it looks like, Bob, if this is a correct characterization, we are kickstarting a lot of projects, but in so doing it, we're taking a significant drawdown of $4+ million more than normal out of REIT. It doesn't seem that use of mitigation funds is significant compared to past history. So really this kickstart before we get our long-range plan on how to finance transportation projects is really using a lot of REIT money to get going next year, and then saying that's not sustainable, so you have to have your conversation next year in order to figure out the rest of the plan.
Yep.
Okay, so I guess if we're talking about that policy question, I'm in favor of the use of the REIT and in favor of the use of the mitigation, based on Bob's answer.
Paul?
Just add to the conversation that on page 64 of the budget document, the current 2017 amended budget for REIT shows a total expenditure of $1.6 million. And so this is a plan to spend 6.9 out of there. So just give you a sense of the magnitude change. And I look back at the last year's budget, and the numbers are, for a number of years have been much lower like that. So that just, that's how it reveals itself in the numbers.
The other thing that I wanted to point out is that this REIT fund is brand new. It was one of the fund accounting changes where we separated REIT from a number of funds so that we could be more transparent on the amount of REIT that you had. And just because of that is that identifying when you would use REIT for capital projects, that you would have a sole source fund to go to and have this kind of a snapshot to look at some of those changes and where those dollars were going.
Everybody to answer the questions?
Well, I was just going to ask Jen, are we doing a thumbs up and thumbs down on that specific policy question? Is that what you're looking for?
The thumbs up or thumbs down would come out of the capital projects.
Okay.
And so I'll point out if there is a project that is removed out, and we'll quickly try to make it known that there would be an adjustment in the REIT fund because we would not be utilizing that source for the project in 18.
Okay. So you're just pointing out the policy question embedded in the votes we're taking?
Yes.
Okay.
From a policy point of view, though, I think because this is a shift, I'd like to hear council members' thoughts on, are you comfortable with doing this for 1 year before we have the bigger conversation? Or is this stressing anybody out? Or do they have any more questions? Because even though I get that if we pull a project or add a project, it changes the bottom line, I just think this is a different approach, and I think we should share our thoughts on it.
Bill?
Yeah, when we start looking at that, and mitigation is one thing, it was doing some things level, but REIT is, taking a fund that's starting at 4 million balance and taking it down to 600,000. So we're spending everything we're making this year and basically spending out the fund. That's a big deal. And these REIT funds could be used on lots of different things, lots of different projects we want. This year, so if we spend them all this year, that means next year, we basically, It's a one-time thing, and we're going for it, and then we have, in my mind, then prioritized all our 2018 projects over our 2019 projects. Now, yes, we'll get more REIT next year, another approximately $3 million we can figure in that range, but it sure won't be $7 million. So, and the way it's embedded in here on all of these different projects, which is the way we should spend it, I don't have a problem with it, but the bigger question should have been before we start breaking it out in all these projects of how much do we want to really empty out a fund. And before we empty it out and then say, so if you say, well, we shouldn't spend it this way, how would you go back now and start picking out projects that are funded by REIT? Would be probably a fairly large catastrophe, trying to sort through that again when we say, oh, we shouldn't really spend it down to almost nothing. So I don't know how to deal with that, but I think a one-time expenditure of this going that far down with all the other projects we have that I think have some really high priorities that people are telling us about and we're hearing and we know, and we're not tackling the ones of the highest priorities from what we've actually said, because most of those are saying we can't really get till 2019. So I have a problem with this. I don't know how to solve it, but I do have a problem with this much expenditure, one-time shot, and then leaving us next year burden.
So there's, so Bill, I heard two questions in your comments. One is prioritization, and one is how we're paying for those. And I'm comfortable with the prioritization because that's the exercise that we already went through. And when the comment is we're not addressing the projects that are priority or that are most needed that we're hearing about, I guess I need to have faith that we already went through that process. If there are, I'm sincerely listening to your concern and thinking about how I feel about it. I think that, yes, I think the drawdown is a concern, but we seem to have a concern or trepidation or lack of planning or lack of something or failing at something every single year before we start projects. And I'm just ready to get started. And you know, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't have a wand. At some point, we're going to have to ask for help. That's just the reality. And so, you know, I do too also want to hear other council members' concerns, but at some point we just got to jump off the cliff and start doing some stuff. I tell you, you know, every time I drive through that roundabout over at Trader Joe's, I think, yep, that is small but mighty. And that, which is a great little thing we accomplished this year. But if we're just nervous every year about taking big leaps, we're just going to find ourselves in just worsening conditions every year. I think we just, at this point, I'm comfortable. All right.
So I believe it was last night at Safety, or maybe it was the night before. They're merging together, but Tola had talked a little bit about a moving target. And I have to say I agree. I do have a concern when I look at the size of that increase and that number, but we have so much that we need to go forward and accomplish. And I think that the example that that you just gave, Stacy, was a perfect one. I feel the same way when I drive around that roundabout, and we have so much more that we could accomplish. So I really do feel like we need to move forward, and then we'll have more that comes in next year, and we can prioritize. But we've already gone down that path, so I feel comfortable.
Eileen?
I'm in favor of moving forward with this. This council always seems to be very cautious and concerned in regards to how the dollars are being utilized. This is an important one, and I think we need to move forward with it. So I will be supporting this, and I just need to share with everyone. There was a lady, and we're talking about the roundabout, who instead of going around it, was on top of it, waiting for all the cars to let her in.
It's going to happen, probably. For a while. Yeah.
Roundabouts are tough.
Other comments?
If I may, yeah. I'll add my voice to the, I think I came into this latter part of these budget negotiations with my eyes wide open, understand what we had done previously with the capital plan and the various funding strategies that it encompassed. And as I've seen it kind of then how we were operationalizing that for 2018. So this question isn't new to me. I've researched it, and you've provided us the breakdown in an earlier budget work session about for the capital plan by funding source. And so we looked at it that way as well. So I knew from the beginning that this was a significant increase in REIT. Matter of fact, we knew that back when we were doing the capital budgeting discussion. We're seeing how this is operationalized. It is a bigger commitment, longer term. And I believe that we will probably be making adjustments to our capital plan at least every other year as we learn more and priorities shift.
Mary Lou?
I just wanted to add one last comment. So after looking at 4 budgets and talking about long-term financing of the backloaded projects, to me, this is a little bit of, we knew this cliff was coming. We seriously started to look at it a year and a half ago, maybe with the ad hoc committee. For me, it boiled down to 2 choices. One, we never got to the end and decided what our long-term funding strategy would be for projects. So we could spend nothing and stay on our course of not spending a lot of REIT and take a year off or 2 of doing projects. I feel that we need to just get our act together, get through this long-term funding question, and I do think we need to continue with the projects. And so while it looks very dramatic, one-time, very large drawdown, it's how we keep things going. But next year, it's all about figuring out this long-term funding of the capital. It can't go another year. That's it. We've set our own deadline now. We don't have a choice. I'm in favor of it.
Okay.
What I put up on the screen is the 5-year capital plan. This is the projects that have identified REIT as a source, fully or a partial source for the overall project. And so you can see REIT comes in 2 buckets according to state law. And so you would look at the 2018 here for one source of REIT, and the other source of REIT, we just combine them. And so these are the projects that were identified as REIT as a source. And I have the one for mitigation as well.
Okay, so no actual thumbs up, thumbs down on this question. You just, thumbs up?
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
yes. Connected to the actual physical projects. Okay.
Next.
I am going to bring back the deliberations sheet, so this one we'll bring back then. How about starting into some of the initiative studies and preliminary design?
Stacy?
Yeah.
Most of the conversation I took, as we just had, is being about REIT. Mitigation?
Mitigation?
That was another one of those questions. We just spend a few minutes before we get back to this line by line and talk about that at the policy level too. I think it was very helpful for everybody to get a chance to speak their perspective on REIT. And specifically about mitigation, I have a question. It is I don't know if it's a philosophical question about mitigation or just a mechanical one. But why wouldn't mitigations be funds be used in proportion for each project that project is actually adding capacity? So perhaps you've got an answer just waiting at the end of your lips, I can tell with that smile.
I don't.
Well, so did that question make sense? I mean, so this question, the way it was posed, I wasn't sure why it was posed. other than it's maybe revealing that I didn't completely understand how we were using our strategies for using mitigation funds. If someone would have asked, I would have said, capital projects that we do that are in any of those categories, transportation, police, fire, parks, and the other categories, any of those projects that have some capacity, some portion of them that is capacity related, and we could use those mitigation funds in that proportion. So we're not doing that, and this is different?
These are the concurrency projects for transportation.
I'm just struggling to come up with an articulate, concise answer to that. So
how about no, we weren't, yes, we are now, or?
Well, I think it's kind of a 50-50 on that. So
okay.
I guess what I would say is some projects are more cut and dry. Transportation, it's easy to identify the projects that are capacity building. And so they can be marked in that way, eligible for mitigation funds. But then you still have to look at what's available in the balance of the fund, think about what other projects are going to be coming up in future years, what the annual revenue recovery to the fund is going to be, which is a bit of crystal ball exercise. And then I think we just try to be thoughtful about applying it to the appropriate projects in order to become, in some cases, the primary source of funding, particularly for transportation projects, and then fill any gap that remains after that if we don't want to do something like take the full mitigation fund for traffic concurrency and throw it toward one project.
So what do we do different this year? And I'm assuming we did something different because you're asking it as a policy question.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's been an annual question of, what do we have? How are we going to use it? So we took some policy direction to provide some clarity on in our financial modeling, what's appropriate use of those funds. We did better forecasting this year. We've tried to be more thoughtful about applying every revenue source across all of the portfolio. So I think that's what we've done differently this year. Can you pull up that policy question? How did we phrase that?
On the mitigation?
Yeah.
Is this something that are we going to change, or you just?
Just for visibility's sake. I mean, why are we asking this question?
Sure. So I think
it says to the extent proposed.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
what's motivating that question? Because these are mitigation funds. They've gone through a process. They have to be eligible.
Right.
They has to be available. Yes, you've done some forecasting. Yes, you've done to do some balancing and some crystal ball looking as well, and you've come up with a set of proposal fund amounts from the various mitigation categories for a set of projects.
Right. I think it's there because there's still choice in that. There's still options available to you. You're right that we have to utilize mitigation funds within a certain period of time, but we have that whole range of time to use those funds before they age out. And so there's still choice. Do you want to rely on this source in the way that we have proposed, or do you want it to look differently? It's probably coupled with all of these questions about how we're using every revenue source. Does it feel like it's appropriate?
I don't like making decisions based on feelings, but.
No, actually, I liked Paul's question, but I was wondering if we could have thought about it this way. If there had been overwhelming concern, and we did hear some concern, but not overwhelming concern about drawing down REIT so much, and if there was a capacity portion of some of these projects that was not funded by mitigation, one of the options would have been to shift between the two funds and say, there's some capacity that was covered by REIT that could be covered by mitigation, and we could have chosen to draw, it would have been the same gross amount if we kept all the projects in, but we could have moved it differently. And it looks like, to me, this question is almost the opposite of the concern with REIT, because in this case, year over year, we're actually drawing mitigation down less. And so if Bill wanted to pound his fist on the table and say you can't have all that REIT money, you may have been able to come back and say at least $1 million to $2 million of mitigation could be used instead of REIT to cover capacity that was not being covered by mitigation dollars. So you could have given us some choice in there. And the reason I like it is because I think what would have helped me in the mayor's letter, I appreciated seeing that priorities, they're not called priorities, they're called something else. Parameters. And also the fact that there was this effort not to draw down the general fund. But what I couldn't get out of the letter was what were we doing different in transportation funding. But tonight, you've made it very, very clear that we had choices. I now understand the choice that we're landing on if we pick all these projects, and it's a significant amount of REIT, and it's not sustainable next year. That's just what it is this year. So, thanks.
And I appreciate the transparency in the question, both of those questions, because we could have gone through all those capital and we would have approved that passively anyway. But instead, you pointed it out and appreciate that.
The final question, I just want to,
Bill?
I'm sorry.
Yeah. So if you talk about me pounding my fist on the table. I could, and just to look at that a little bit further, I don't want to pound my fist quite yet, but you know, when the mitigation fund is actually growing, we're not even using what we're doing, and it's at 18 million, right? So the question I would definitely ask is, and to me, correct me if I'm wrong, but mitigation has a tighter bound of where you can use it versus REIT, correct? So I would try to use the mitigation wherever I could, where it fits most appropriately, and use all of it we can, because we're building a fund of $18 million that we're sitting on, and if we don't have the right projects that fit on it, use it, we're not using it, right? Because we can't. So of these places where we've used, you know, proposed spending, you know, 2.6 million or so, mitigation versus REIT, where we're able to trade those funds in places and use more in this sense than REIT. I mean, that's the kind of stuff I was talking about. You're behind the scenes in the art of this, saying, okay, here's the project X dollars in total, and then a little bit from here, a little bit from here, and that's the part we don't see, and you're kind of making those decisions, and sometimes it'd be like, well, why don't we focus more on pushing that project up with more mitigation funds and less REIT funds, right? If we have more bank in mitigation. Making some sense? Everybody's starting to look at me a little different.
Can I ask you a question, Bill?
So I'm just getting that's the balance of these different funds, and I think it's critical when we're drawing one fund down and the other fund is growing, you know, continuing to grow, and it's going to be the tighter fund at a later time. I would rather spend the tightest fund we have as much as we can.
So I have a clarification for you. If the capital improvement plan that we approved in September spends down the 18 million over the period of time such that there are no losses of money and it is applied to projects throughout the year, would that lessen your concern or not? If staff were to say, we're not concerned about losing 18 million because we've already fitted into the plan, according to the schedule with which we could lose it, so to make sure we don't lose it, would that ease your mind about spending that much REIT this year? As long as you knew you weren't going to lose any of your 18 million?
Somewhat. I'd still be, you know, cautious on why we're focusing more on one than the other. When obviously we have projects that qualify for the mitigation funding. It's being used. So that's just that balancing act that I know you're trying to do, and I'm just asking when. To me, it looks a little bit out of balance, that balancing.
So you got to remember you can't pay for existing deficiencies with mitigation funds. So that's one of the challenges. So I think what we laid out was and it's a bit of an art rather than a science. The science part of it, which is still some art in it, is the transportation. I mean, because we got a model, there's some good science based on that. We can know based on concurrency what gets paid out of that. Some of the rest, there's a little bit more of the art. So a good example would be the new fire station that would be proposed. You know, I think the majority of that could be paid for by mitigation funds. And if you look at the fire mitigation fund and when that would kind of line up, it's not all of it, but you can plan for some of the growth we've had and then some of the future growth that's planned. That's what that mitigation fund is for. So that would be one that's more of an art than a science. Right. but you're really restricted to paying for future or current or growth that recently occurred.
And I would just add that I think we have done just what you're asking and what Councilmember Pauly was speaking about, which is identify the projects that are eligible, know what's in the fund or will be in the fund, and spend it down to the fullest extent possible. So I think we've done that smart utilization that you're seeking. I don't think that we have shied away from using mitigation for eligible projects.
Okay, and that's the first time I've heard it said that way. Prior to that, it's been kind of a balancing act. It's not saying directly, okay, we've used all the mitigation funds we could on this project first, and then we've used this or whatever. That's kind of, like I say, it's behind the scenes, and we're not seeing all that.
Paul?
Yeah, I just want to comment, Bill, the use of the phrase behind the scenes, I'm not sure if that's intentional or not, but it does convey that maybe something is being hidden. I feel that from the time we started working on the capital plan and we saw the different sources over time, over projects, and what was going to be taken, I felt that the output of that work that was done not in front of the council has been very accessible and very clear to us. So I want to say that, again, describing it as, behind the scenes or something like that I feel it's been very transparent for a long time now.
I'll take those words back. I didn't mean behind the scenes where no one knows what's going on in smoke-filled rooms. I did not mean that.
25 feet away from the building. Okay, next. We're at 825.
We are, and I just wanted to point out again, number 10 it, was listed as a policy question, but this is reflective. Then I'll shift back to the budget highlights and into the list of initiatives, studies, and preliminary design. These are the red are amounts that are included in the proposed budget, with the exception of the blue highlights, that these were adds after the proposed budget, but the administration felt were significant that we asked that the council deliberate those. So we wanted to start at the top, if that is agreeable.
Okay. So I have, we have this list, and then what's the next list?
Let's see. This list, and then we have some under the category of maintenance and operations. We have 2 items, and then we have the capital projects that we have in the categories.
Okay. So let's go back up to the one that you were suggesting. So I have a suggestion, and I spoke with each of you briefly before the meeting and gave you an idea I had about moving efficiently through the capital projects, and we'll talk about that when we get there. But I had the same idea as I'm looking at this, and that is because we haven't, we're 2 hours into our meeting, and if we deliberate every item as we have so far, with a considerable amount of discussion on most items, we could be here for a long time. So I just had a suggestion that we may want to consider voting in blocks, except for items that you want to pull down and talk about. So, so just as an example, if you did a line 42 through 60 and a thumbs up, that would mean that everything that you're proposing passes, right?
Yes.
So you could do that. You could go from that extreme to talk about everything, or council members can look at the list and pull out items that they want to talk about in particular, and the rest of items we could vote in a block. Just suggesting it because we've spent, I think, by the time we add up all the hours we've spent on the budget, and we are proposed to be in our last hour, I think we will have spent 25 hours on a budget. It's just an idea, and I'm just Mariah?
I think it's a good idea. The blocks.
Okay.
And then we can
Eileen's
just
nodding her
pull
head.
out what we
Pull
want
out what you want to talk about. We're happy to do that, but the other ones, if we go down each one, we'll probably, several of us will think of questions, and if we don't need to, we need to, great. If we don't, then why?
I don't actually have any items between 40 and 60 that I want to pull down.
Okay. I guess it would be 40 through 60, except for 41.
That's correct.
Wait, yeah,
Because we did that one.
okay.
I have two that I
Okay,
would pull
what are
down.
they?
47 council retreat and 49 water system plan reauthorization, if I believe that's the right one that we talked about a little bit earlier with Sheldon, right? Is that the water treatment plant?
No, it's different.
That is not.
It's the plan.
Different, they're two different things.
It's not the water treatment plant, it's the requirement we got to meet the Department of Health requirements to get our water system plan done once a decade.
You had authorized
Gotcha.
it for 2017, but because of staffing challenges, we're
Right,
needing
okay.
to roll it over.
So I just, wherever that one is, find it somewhere else. But then just council retreat then.
Okay, but you are correct, Bill, that we did talk about the water system treatment plant earlier, and
Yeah.
maybe under capital, Paul might want to talk about
Yeah.
the linkage of that back to this water system plan.
Okay, so Bill, we're pulling down, we're not going, if we vote, when we vote in a block, I'm assuming, I heard head nods, that will not, the 47 will not be included, because we'll talk about that separately. So I'll wait for a moment and see. Mariah?
Could I just get a quick explanation of number 50, the PFAS?
Okay, we'll pull that one out. Paul?
Jen, are these sorted and grouped by yet?
They're kind of all over the board here.
Have you done that sorting,
Could you repeat
grouping?
that, please?
That Stacy?
These line items are not sorted by the categories in the capital budget.
They're different.
I'm going to pull up a different sheet that are sorted this way. These are, this is the fund that it would affect.
Okay, all right, so this is still the same order that we have in our document.
That's correct.
This
It has
isn't
not
this.
changed order.
Mariah?
Just want to make.
I did, a point of clarification, just if I just have a quick question, just to explain this to me, can I decide whether to just keep it in the block?
Sure.
Okay, so, question, just space planning. Could I just get a quick nutshell of that?
Sure, we'd like some help figuring out how to house everybody. So this is back to, taking a look at our various buildings and looking at the space needs that we currently have and constraints, and then figuring out a game plan for hopefully the next few years until ultimately perhaps we can all be under one roof.
Does that involve a consultant?
It does. It does. It's kind of complicated, and we're hoping that will include an increment for actual kind of tenant improvements to move people around if needed.
Great. I could put that back unless someone else needs to keep it up.
Other items you want to pull down? So far, it's PFAS and council retreat. Anything else? Paul, seems like, Paul, you're still thinking, so I'm waiting.
Well, what is that list? Where did that, I'm looking for that list. I'm sorry, I've gotten lost, and that's probably my mistake.
Is there a heading on that list?
So the list is just the most significant projects that are requiring, I think they're all one-time allocations. So these are significant work plan items that we would propose for next year.
Where are they in the packet?
They're on page 5.
Pull up the packet. Yes.
Mariah?
Page 5.
Could I just get an explanation of PFAS so I can decide whether to put that back
Okay.
in?
So it's two items, 35,000 for what I would call general expenses, so legal expenses, and then our consultant as we go through the process. And then 30,000 was the match that Ecology had asked. They had come up with 50,000 out of their operating budget. At the legislative breakfast, we're going to ask our legislators for an additional 200,000. Okay. But he had asked for some money from EFR and from the city, and so 30 of that 65 would be kind of our match to Ecology.
I can put that back in.
Okay. Yeah, I'm waiting to see.
Again, still just a process question. So
Sure.
I had put all my embedded questions and comments in Monday's packet. I didn't transfer them all over to this one electronically. Is this one that's in today's packet a different order? Because it doesn't look the same.
It doesn't look the same because the line items that had not been discussed are red. But the list here, there, you can see here, there were some additional line items that the council were to add something. So Monday's packet is the same. The dollar amounts are the same.
Okay. I just found that there's a page break in a completely different place, and now I can see it. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Okay. Parking enforcement.
Want to pull it down?
Yes.
Okay. 59.
And I think, Mary Lou, that was one you asked us to.
Look at the emails, yeah.
Yeah.
Mariah?
Just a quick nutshell on number 51, mitigation fee review. Just a quick explanation.
This would be work that we would undertake in 2018 to review all of our fees. And so that is essentially consultant work that we would
focus just on
our mitigation and impact fees.
Primarily the general government ones that we haven't looked at for a long, long time.
The ones planning policy had asked?
Yep.
Yes.
Great. Okay. That can go back on for me.
Okay. Anything else? Anybody? Okay, seeing head nods. So thumbs up on this means that you approve what's been proposed
Yes.
by the administration in this list, with the exception of number 47 and number 59.
That's correct. And I just wanted to add is that the blue would be adds to the budget. The non-blue would be, they are included in the proposed budget.
With that,
There's I'm glad you mentioned that. So when we put the budget together, most of those are, as you indicated, significant projects that are included in the budget. The ones that are in blue were items that we had intended to put in and then forgot, just got missed when we finalized the budget, or they came in late. I think is Lake Sammamish State Park Agreement. Is that in blue? It should be blue, I think. Or did we? I don't think it was in.
You're correct. That should be blue.
Yeah. So that was an example. So like the mobility master plan, we intended to put that into the budget, and it just got missed. And then council retreat, we had some money in the budget originally for that, and then when we were on the final, decision day from the administration side on items to include or not include, we had actually had 40 in there. We cut 10. But the whole thing accidentally got deleted. So that's an example of something that we're coming back and saying. Yeah, it did when we did the spreadsheet.
Budgeting by
it was
spreadsheets.
legitimately accidentally deleted.
So Bob, if we were to go back to our budget book, there's a proposed ending fund balance. Anything that's not highlighted in blue was included. And so if we vote them down, it would actually increase our proposed ending New,
Depends on the
Anything in blue that
sorry,
you vote.
anything in white.
Anything in white.
It's already in here, and so if we were to turn this all down, we would be taking some expenditures out of the budget.
Yes.
But everything in blue was never reflected in the budget. And so if we,
So if you vote it down, if you vote it up, you're actually
You were
taking it from the
actually
ending
taking
fund
it from the
balance.
ending fund
Yes,
balance.
or the water.
Blue ones.
The blues.
All blues would be
ending
new
fund
expenditures that
New
would then
expenditures.
require a deduct from the fund
And
balance.
the big numbers are reauthorization, the 200s.
right,
Yeah.
the 200s of reauthorizations.
Yeah, and so the water, and so we also have to look at the funds. So some of those
Yeah,
coming
some
out of
them
water
don't-
and stuff.
Yeah, some of them, they're not all general fund.
Correct.
That's right.
Correct. And just a tiny little point of clarification, but just so that we're clear. The ones in blue, the dollar amounts weren't included in the budget for a variety of reasons, but in some cases, the actual projects are showing up on the page, so you can tell there was intention. It's just, we made a miss.
I guess, Emily, the reason I brought it up is because at some point, we're just going to have to go back and look at what we're doing here overall in terms of net increases and decreases. I just want everybody to be clear that everything that was white here was already in, and everything that's blue is new and would have to be in.
What I'd like to point out is the actual tracking sheet. So those blue items you'll see in, this is the summary budget of revenues, expenditures, and impact on fund balance. And so those blue items, should they be approved, you would see a dollar amount, and it may be in summary, but what we will provide is the detailed list of what's changing based on your deliberations. And as I stated in my memo, that this essentially is the budget ordinance, the exhibit. Once we have final council adjustments, you would see final revenues, final expenditures, and the estimated impact on fund balance for the year. So this is our tracking tool. This is live right here. Depending on my quick Excel spreadsheet skills, I may be able to do that, but this is the document that you would receive after tonight as we move forward for the final adoption for Monday night.
So it is not being updated in real time.
You can see that there are some
Yes or no?
items here. There are two separate spreadsheets. I'm it tonight for doing that.
That's all I want to know.
But this sheet, this deliberation sheet, that's why I'm taking notes here. And so you will see the accounting, you will see the math on the sheet that I just showed you.
Which is a sheet that only an accountant could love.
Any other questions? Are we all clear on what the thumbs up would be and the thumbs down would be? Okay, you ready?
Yep.
So which one first?
It's one
Everything
vote.
except
It's everything except 47
council
and
retreat.
59.
And parking.
47 and 59 would be separate discussions after this vote. Ready? 1, 2, 3, go. Unanimous? Okay, council retreat 47. Bill?
Yeah, I'm just, have a hard time figuring that we need $30,000 to have a retreat. And I know what the concept was, but it just seems not the best way to spend some of our funds. I think we could do it a lot cheaper than that and still accomplish what we want.
So can we get an idea of what the plans are so we can figure out whether it makes sense or not?
Yeah, so the intent was an off-site retreat somewhere over a couple days with a facilitator. This would cover all the costs of travel, lodging, the cost of the facilitator, and then any other pre-work the facilitator would be involved in from that day. So that would essentially cover those costs. We haven't picked a location yet. Sammamish, for example, goes to Sankaty when they do their resort. They went to Sankaty Resort when they do their annual retreat. So that's what the proposal is. I think from the administration's perspective, and I know we've talked to council leadership before, it's really important that we get a good, solid retreat. I think last year we had a good retreat. It was done in-house. It was a day, but it did help inform us on the administration when we did the budget. So I think, especially with the strategic plan happening next year, that from the administration's perspective, being able to have the leadership of the city sit down and work with the department directors and the council on planning out, the future of the community, especially looking at a 2-year budget for next year, is pretty important. So you could do it here if that's a choice, but it's not uncommon for organizations to go on a off-site retreat and just focus on the organization's business.
Right. And just for folks that are watching, that would include all the department directors, a lot of folks from city staff and so forth as well. So that's why it adds up. It's not just 7 people, council retreat. When it sounds like that, people just
you're probably looking at like 20
right?
people
20 plus people, 20, 25 people probably. So that's why it adds up, because there's a lot of folks involved.
If you looked at it on a per person basis, you're probably looking at about 1,400 for lodging, consultants, like we talked about, food.
Right.
So,
and I understand the concept and purpose. I just still think it's a little much.
So just to be clear, the administration and leadership did not talk about this line item. I just want to make it clear. I have not talked to Bob or Emily or anybody else about what this line item should be. We have not talked at all about where an off-site retreat would be. It was news to me that it was $30,000. I have no idea what that cost would be. I have.
Right. I didn't mean to imply.
No. I just want to make it clear.
I would just say I think we were in agreement that doing a retreat is really, really important for us to do.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I too had just the knee-jerk, $30,000 sticker shock. I have no idea what it would cost. For all I know, we can all go camping for $2,000. I mean, I don't know. But do I think we need to be far away? No. Do I think we need to necessarily spend that money? No. Do I have any idea what that costs? No. So do I have heartburn with putting $30,000 and then the council figuring out later next year exactly what that retreat looks like? I'm fine with that. Mariah?
What did the retreat cost this last year? We did a kind of an evening before, and then we had a full day at the senior center.
I think we had some costs for breakfast and lunch.
And
that was it. We had no facilitator.
Bowling. We went up.
I'd be venturing a guess, probably in the vicinity of $1,500. I think by the time you had the bus and the bowling and the food expenses and that type of thing.
Really?
I guess, I think this one has got a little sensitivity around it, and I think a retreat can be really exciting and really helpful. So it sounds like next year's administration and leadership will work to make sure that it's something that everybody thinks is worth the value before we go ahead. So there'll be a plan, there'll be a price. Is this what you want to do? There's no desire to spend $30,000 if a $5,000 retreat works. But the idea is to make sure it's structured in a way that is meaningful and effective and whatever we have to do. So I don't have any heartburn with the $30,000, but I understand that there's a lot of planning left to do first.
Agreed. Mariah?
I would just agree with that, and I wanted to say, especially with the strategic plan coming up, and I feel like retreats are so incredibly important, and I really enjoyed what we did last year, but having all of the staff there and being able to work through a lot of the issues, and everybody's sort of set aside all of this time to do it, and we have the time to do it, I feel like we make a lot of headway. And so I'm just a big proponent of having a retreat. I don't know how to really comment on the 30,000. So I would go along with what Mary Lou just talked about in terms of taking a look at it and having it make sense.
Paul?
It doesn't show in front of us right now, but in the packet, there's a column that talks about one-time or ongoing. This one is labeled as ongoing. Is that, I realize we're not voting on beyond next year, but I think it's just important it is in the packet of information, and I don't know if that's our intent, really.
Yeah, I think thematically, it's our intent to have a retreat each year. But we can certainly have discussions about, is it offsite every year? Is it 2 days every year? Is it 1 day?
Right.
So the scale can be adjusted. I think the intent, just by labeling it as ongoing, is we would really like to put it into the base budget at some level, or the intention of doing it.
And in years past, as we got down to this line level deliberation, we looked at one time or ongoing. I mean, it was, okay, we're making an ongoing commitment to X amount of dollars, and this may or may not be that. I just wanted to point that out.
We do have a column that says whether it's one ongoing or one-time expense.
Yeah, she exposed it up here now.
Right.
Thank you. John hit it.
Okay, do we have other questions? Are you ready to vote? Okay, thumbs up means keeping the $30,000 in the budget for retreat. 1, 2, 3, go. Okay. 5-1. 59, parking enforcement. Paul?
I'm going to ask Mary Lou to justify it for us.
So this was something that I actually proposed more as a council initiative, and then worked with the administration on scoping it out. It comes from several different sources. One is my connection with the Chamber of Commerce. Over a couple of years, I've heard the concerns about parking in certain areas around town having to do with overflow parking from transit centers. The transit center in SR 900, the transit center up in the Highlands. But there has also been just anecdotally other information as well about handicap parking and whether or not we're truly providing enforcement. And the reason that I pulled it out specifically from police services to be parking enforcement is because we are already working to understand appropriate levels of staffing for policing, and I don't believe just adding parking into that group makes a whole lot of sense when we're having issues just doing traffic enforcement. Parking would then fall even further below that. And so I checked in with a few folks to see what other cities did it, and it can be contracted. So this money is to pilot parking enforcement in different areas, and because the different neighborhoods are so different, in terms of what their needs are, the approach would be slightly different, whether it was over on Mall Street, downtown around the 554 bus stop, or up in the Highlands. And I provided you some information from property owners on Mall Street and property owners in the Highlands. Bob and Emily also pointed out that probably not completely on council members' radar, there is a shuttle system, a couple of shuttle systems that operate right now in town, and some used to have, these are corporate shuttle systems, arrangements with transit centers to park, and they have lost those arrangements. And so the people that are getting picked up by the shuttles are now also parking potentially off-site on the street during the day and getting picked up by the shuttle. There's at least 3, I think, different major companies that do that right now, and each one does it a little differently. Emily was able to give me some background on that's another whole layer of complication. And so the administration has reached out to talk with those groups as well. So this has to do with making sure we have available parking daytime, it's not being taken up by transit users, and then the other piece that was added on is enforcement of handicap, to make sure that handicap spots are being used appropriately, and if not, that we're doing something about it.
Of the laws already on the books, it sounds like enforcement of handicap parking is the only one you mentioned. And you talked about parking at transit centers, but if that sounds like, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what you just said on how we're going to. You talked about 3 companies and somehow talking with them, and somehow they're parking different for their shuttle. What are the laws that you feel are not being enforced now that if we had a focus on, we could just start there? I mean, that's
great. In talking with Chief Beerbaum, we do have parking code right now, and most of it has to do with overnight parking, which is also an issue. This would require a code adjustment to specify 4 to 6 hour parking maximum. So it starts with a code, adjustment to a code, and it talks about what areas you would want to do it in, and then the enforcement comes. So it has some upfront work to be done to do it.
I have a question. So are you proposing actual work? Are you proposing, because it says, Mary Lou to work with the administration on scope. Scope of what? Like it would come back as a recommendation?
It would. It would probably come back, I assume, as an agenda bill. And in talking with both Bob and Scott, $30,000 would actually be expense ask now to get a program going, but there would be associated revenues when the program is going. None of that has been scoped out in terms of if we were to do, for example, contract with Diamond Parking for certain levels of enforcement in certain areas, what are the expected revenues you would collect versus. So this is really the money to get a parking pilot going. And so it wouldn't be an ongoing cost. It would be the beginning of parking enforcement in town.
And the scope of it yet to be determined.
Scope of it yet to be determined because of the complexities of having parking rides in town, shuttle services in town, and then Paul said the one that is the clearest is the handicap parking abuses.
All right, thank you. So that's, as I suspected, there's a lot more behind it. There is an agenda, so you anticipate an agenda bill. And, okay, I understand the argument. I have no more questions at this time.
Okay. Mariah?
I really like this idea, and I would support that. I know that there's a lot of work to be done on that. I'm wondering, in regard to the scope, and I realize this is called parking enforcement, so, but as you're defining the scope, I wonder if the issue of downtown merchants and being able to park after hours downtown could potentially be added into that.
You could. This was
a little bit of a scope creep, I get that, but.
Well, that's the capacity piece of it, which that's not what this one was not really set up to address capacity. But now that you bring it up, one of the issues with parking enforcement in Old Town will be to ensure that those businesses that are here that have employees also have a way of having their employees park without getting ticketed. So there's a functional piece to it, but not a capacity piece to it. So this really didn't have much to do with.
I just thought.
Yeah, capacity's on a different line.
From a scope perspective, however, if there was parking enforcement and businesses understood that could happen, then maybe they would be more amenable to having hours, which would help with capacity, which is a different issue.
One of the suggestions that was made from one of the businesses I dealt with was that we would be able to find some efficiencies potentially with private owners who already use parking enforcement, meaning that we might be able to use the same service to provide it on public streets as they're currently using them.
Okay, are there other questions specifically about this line item? I was just going to say that I support it. I think it's time that we address parking. It's been an issue for a while, and it's becoming a larger issue with more and more traffic and folks coming here to hop on transit. And I don't know exactly what that looks like. I'm supportive of adding the line item so that we can start to look at the issue and figure out exactly what that pilot program looks like, even though I don't know exactly what it looks like. So anyway, Bill?
So yeah, I'm just slightly different. I think we do need to work on this, but I would like to see it come more normal through the agenda bill process, that it gets a little more scoped out and come to us next year with a little more detail, a little more planning and so forth, versus just a pot of money now and let, kind of work it that way. So I wouldn't support it right now. I support the concept, but I'd like to have it come to council in a different way.
It is coming to council it would come to council as an agenda bill.
Right. And ask for funding at that time.
Anybody else? Oh.
As soon as I heard agenda bill, and we've heard that on a lot of these, I wonder, okay, so why are we approving anything now? We can usually put together an agenda bill concept out a special line item. It says parking enforcement. It's kind of like parking, you call it a pilot. It's parking enforcement. There's a study component. And I think that's what's very critical. Everything that I've heard about parking is, I can sum up in one word, anecdotal. We don't have any empirical data. When I hear people talking about handicap parking, it's all anecdotal. And so the idea of studying this, I don't know that it's ever going to go more than this. But do you have a number, and what kind of number is in mind? If this is a proposal to kickstart it, to hire somebody to do a study, what do you think the ultimate number could be? Just, do you have any ballpark number? Do you guys go there at all?
No, I didn't think it's appropriate. So to me, it's more of a, what we're identifying is that parking enforcement has been an issue in town. We haven't actually done it. And you're right, it's anecdotal, but it has been mentioned for many, many, many years now that this is something that we ought to be looking at. The park and rides are definitely overflowing. The property owners, business owners around the parking rides notice the effect. So I don't know ultimately if we were to do a pilot maybe up around the Highlands Transit Center for 6 months and then collect data that way and decide what we would do citywide. I don't know what the number citywide would be. I didn't want Bob to spend a lot of time. If council's isn't interested in pursuing it, I didn't want to have the administration, checking in with Bellevue about how many violations do you get, what are the revenues, what are the costs. So this was really, I would call it an initiative, and I think, I'm comfortable with the $30,000. I'm comfortable with picking a pilot area, changing the code to begin dealing with the overflow parking that we're getting from transit commuters. So.
Eileen.
As a past downtown Issaquah merchant, this has been a problem for many years. This isn't something that's new. And it comes from a lot of the people who take the bus in, and so they'll come, and especially downtown, and fill up all of the parking spaces so that even those employees that are coming in can't find parking. It's a very important issue, and I think we need to leave it in and study this.
Are you ready to vote? Yes? Okay. So thumbs up means it's in the budget. Am I characterizing that right?
It would be added.
Thumbs up means it would be added to the budget. Okay, 1, 2, 3, go. 1. Okay, 5-1. That block only took.
Okay, we have completed that block.
Look, we get to skip a whole bunch now.
Oh my goodness.
They voted on the block not discussed separately. The two items were discussed separately here.
Good.
Okay. Now we're going to shift down to the maintenance and operations. There is this is not in the budget. This is a demolition of the annex building. And then we have the televisation of the commission and committee meetings. So those are the two items here left.
Okay. I mean, we might as well just ask questions. How many? We have 2 left?
We have 2 left in the maintenance and operation.
One added.
And
then the televised. Is that right?
yeah, we have 74, which is the general fund facilities, the demolition of this building. And then we have this line item, which is televising all commission and committee meetings for the 208-800.
Okay, so it's not really, so we've got.
This was added to the list on
Yeah,
Monday night. I'm sorry, yes, this would be blue. My apologies.
Yeah. So we have two, 74 and 76.
Correct.
Okay.
Misread it, shouldn't be.
Okay, so let's knock those out. So let's start with 70. There's no block.
I just want to say the 208 for that, you could probably come back with a lesser number because that's like a full year funding to do. You
Yeah.
already did that?
Yeah, so let's start with the 74. 74, what questions do we have on this?
Just a quick one, Bob. So this come about as a project after the budget was submitted, or is it just something that was planned and didn't make it into the budget?
Which one was it?
Demolition.
The at work.
Oh, yes. that was it.
It's something that they had been talking to us about, but disconnected from our, our internal development of the budget, and came to light after it was already out
On the
the door,
radar for
and
a
we
long
should
time.
have put it in,
Okay.
but yeah.
Thanks.
They're the tenant. In scope of this work, they're still going to be the tenant. This is our building. We're going to demolish it. For what purpose?
Is this the old?
Yeah, it's an older structure, so it would need significant renovation. It's not in use by at work. The city doesn't have a purpose for it. There's conversations about repurposing the property in the future. So it's mitigating risk. It's eliminating future cost. It's setting us up for possible future decision-making about land use there.
Other questions?
I just wonder, which building is it?
It is the building referred to as the annex. There's a kind of residential-like structure that's next to their main building, and then it would also include the recycling canopy.
Okay, so there's 3 buildings on that property
Correct.
right now. These are the north 2 then, actually.
North 2.
Yeah. Thank you.
You ready to vote on that? Okay, so thumbs up means it goes in the budget.
Correct.
1, 2, 3, go. Okay, unanimous. Televising. So you have numbers. You had some, you said wouldn't have to do the. Sorry. It's okay.
I was still thinking about that work. Yes, I have a revised cost estimate. This would be based on televising 3 to 4 additional meetings, and most of those boards and commissions meet a single time each month, so you could think of it also as being perhaps 3 or 4 additional boards or commissions. So staffing costs plus the equipment and installation costs, but excluding any possible security enhancement costs, which we haven't really evaluated yet, and would be determined in part by which room is selected, potentially. So $130,000 is the estimate for staffing, equipment, installation costs.
And so that would, 130,000, and then there would be maybe a later determination, and we haven't talked about this, just so everybody knows, later determination about which meetings those would be, which
I
board
would
or
assume,
commission?
yeah.
Okay, so
we could draw them out of a hat tonight.
No, but there isn't, it would just, therefore, regardless of which ones they are.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Other questions?
So did that equip one other room? Is that what you just described?
Yeah, thank you. It would equip one other room. The original proposal that is shown there equipped 2 rooms.
And I assume that room probably wouldn't be as booked as this one is.
Yeah, I think the leading candidate is the Pickering Room at City Hall Northwest, which has the ability for public access, and certainly lots of residents already go to that building. But it's the largest room that we have and probably the most suitable for televising, recording.
And it's historically had a real heating and cooling problem. We used to meet there, and it was
We love
unbearable.
that building.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, well, the real point of my question, and sorry, it was just, okay, so then that capacity, that capacity would always be there. It would always be available.
Yeah,
said
there are some meetings currently that extend into the evening. We've hosted neighborhood meetings there, special project, capital project type meetings, staff meetings that go longer. So we'd have to be thoughtful about how to reserve the room, and there would be some changes. Plus, those boards or commissions that are selected obviously would be meeting in a different place and possibly a different day or time.
Yeah, and I'm just getting to the point that additional capacity and not planning on everything would potentially create an on-demand capability that's difficult to satisfy today. Hey, we want to do a special meeting, but this room isn't available. Now we'd have two places on demand. We would have a greater ability to do that. Something arose in more of the near term, and we want to have a publicly televised or at least recorded other meeting. Okay.
Mariah?
I really like this idea, both for giving more visibility to these 3 or 4 commissions and also the special meetings. So just to clarify, it would be 3 to 4, not all, and then it would be 130,000 that we would be voting on.
So I don't think we've gotten to that point yet.
Okay,
but
sorry.
That's okay, but
Yeah.
but I think I'm guessing we will. Other questions? Tola sent me an email earlier today, so I was going to read it. No?
Questions only or comment?
Questions at this? I mean, I suppose either one.
Yeah. So as I looked at those the last time, I kind of mentioned there's just a smidge room in this room, and we're shifting a little bit on commissions and which ones go. So I would not support adding that, particularly in Pickering, where I think we can get a couple more commissions that fit in this room, and we would be totally booked and wouldn't have any flexibility, that's for sure. But I think that would be the best way to go versus outfitting something in Pickering, which you already say has to be totally redone or moved out of even for the long run. So anyway, but yeah, I'm going to say let's max this room out, most of the important, the big commissions are here, and we can get 1 or 2 more in.
So, so I would support 208 and I would support 130. I want us to move in that direction. I feel, I like the way we've headed. Anyway, Tola sent me an email earlier today. I'm the one that asked the question, and Tola's the one that added it to the deliberations list. And he said, Stacy, please support the entire $208,000 for the televising committees. We have been on a journey these last few years towards more transparency. It has led to more civic engagement. Let's keep going down that path by leading the region in televising our public process. So, if there are no more questions, I was going to maybe look for head nods and see. We can do it 2 ways. We can do a thumbs up, thumbs down on the 208, and then we can do a thumbs up, thumbs down on the 130 if the 208 doesn't pass. Or if I see kind of head nods that people kind of like the 130 more, we can.
130.
So can we change? So I would request we change it to 130 and take a vote on that. Then if it fails, we'll go to 208. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
So, are you ready to vote? Mm-hmm. And just the other thing too is, I think you said leading contenders. Pickering, there might. I don't think.
I think I was just debating whether or
Yeah.
not to say this. We are getting to that point where it would be challenging to find another room. I think we threw out Baxter room as another possible choice. That seats about 10 comfortably.
Yeah.
So we are running out of options in other rooms that might be available to us would probably displace other meetings or community use.
A question for Emily. So Eastside Fire and Rescue has a meeting room that is not used in the evening and is much larger than ours. And so I'm not exactly sure what the kind of setup would be for televising, but if that were an option, and also considering the fact that they're going to relocate and potentially relocate into Issaquah Station at some point, that might set the tone for temporarily we're televising from a location they own, but in the future we may actually be able to add some meeting room capacity and even another setup at their future facility as well, because that is a much larger facility. I'm just not sure what's all involved with setting up the room and what that means.
Sure,
It's
we
not-
haven't
it's not used
done
much at night.
that degree of research.
Right.
Yeah.
Paul?
If this passes in whatever level, then the space planning, I would think, should try to incorporate this additional item.
We will have to, because that area around Pickering and Pickering itself are certainly things that we have been debating, because we do have other space needs, yes.
Ready?
Yep.
Okay, thumbs up means $130,000 goes in the, will go into the budget, which is, okay. 1, 2, 3, go. Okay. Is that 5-1? Okay.
Okay.
Stacy,
Yeah.
I was just going to say, Jen, oh yeah, I think you've got televised 3 to 4 instead of all.
Mariah, just change that. We voted. That's what it says. You're going to sneak that by.
Okay, the last items then were a little bit of a shift. I'm going to bring up because they were reorganized in the in these categories based on the capital, the financial management policy, capital budget. And so what you see here is, and I did this sort, so we've got A to Z. So if you jump down to the bottom two, desirable, acceptable, and then deferrable. And so.
Is that all of them?
There's more. There's more.
Okay, I was going to say.
Jen, I have a favor to ask. Could you do a 2-column sort and do budget category second at alphabetical? Because it'll help me find things a lot faster.
Sure.
You know how to do that?
Not as fast, and when I'm on camera, no.
Highlight column A4 through G4 all the way to the bottom.
A4 through G4? Mm-hmm. This is what the finance
Click on the data tab.
team is for.
See sort.
Ah,
A through.
Add column A.
yeah, okay. Got
A
it.
to Z, go. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Did it work? No.
What? Oh, do it again, I'm sorry. Click, do it again, and then click on the upper right, click My Data Has Headers.
Headers, okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
So I
Thank you.
mentioned this
Okay.
It's still in.
before the meeting, just as a block voting idea, similar to what we just did. They're sorted by how their criteria ranked, so to speak, in the capital improvement plan. And desirable being highest priority, no, second to highest priority. The highest priority is the things we have to do that are mandated by something that we don't really have a choice. Desirable is the next, and then acceptable, and then deferrable. And so I thought we could go by block, and if there was a desire to, just like we did before, if there are items you want to have more conversation about, pull them out. Otherwise, we would take, and then we would take a vote on the items that are not pulled out.
I've got one more possible way to do this, add to that, but I would like to look at the ones that are not funded, that are planning to get some sort of debt to fund them, to look at them differently as another, you can do it as a block or something, but the ones that are not funded.
Line 36.
Those are the three.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
First block of acceptable, I'd like to pull out water treatment plant.
What number is it?
Third line,
33?
Okay.
Hold on, I'm still looking through these.
Oh, wait, I got to pull the right one. No, this is the right one. Yeah. Okay.
Scroll over. Okay, hold on. So which ones are we going to do first? Which block?
You want to talk, so the ones that you highlighted, ones that were not funded?
The bold are the ones that are included in the, as a portion of non-funded.
Okay.
Okay. The red was a request to discuss that separately outside of the block.
Okay. So are you wanting to talk to each one of those unfunded ones separately, or you wanted to vote on a block? Are you pulling them out?
They can be a block. I think we can start them as a block. Funded as a block.
Or do you, if you're just going to want to talk about all three of them, then why don't we just discuss them separately? Are you going to want to talk about all three of them?
Discuss separately?
Yeah.
Now we can vote.
I'm not typing that well.
Okay. Others? You all want to talk about separately? And I suppose we could just vote on the, we don't have to vote in a block. We could just vote on everything that we're not going to talk about separately.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Oh, true.
Well,
the master park planning,
okay.
I don't know which, it's titled Park Master Planning. Did you already call out water treatment plan? You did, okay. Good.
Anything else?
Not for me.
No?
Sorry. Confluence Park, there's just some more on that, and I'm just want to make sure I know what that is. Can you?
Anything else? Going to wait another minute? We have 7. Any more, Bill? No? Right?
I'm just going to pull out the Providence Point intersections so I can better understand.
Okay.
I would agree with that if you would call it the 43rd Street.
That's 14.
You ready? We can do it two ways. We can start discussing things separately and vote on the block last in case there's anything else we want to bring out. Or we can vote on the block now, talk about them separately. Bill wants to
Separately
wait.
first.
Okay.
I prefer to vote on the block and then work our way through each one and vote on each one after we discuss it.
Okay.
So-
Okay.
I think Bill's requesting that we leave the option open that we can pull something else down. And since this was a late request of mine that we, this voting strategy, I think that's fine. I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, I did have one I want to call out. I just found my other note here. The community center phase
Phase
2.
All right,
Did you already have that? No, you didn't. Okay.
right.
Sorry, I didn't mention that the other day.
All right, let's get started.
Okay.
Okay, is the true first one, oh, community center?
The true first one is Community Center Phase 2.
All right. What do you want to know?
Well, again, I apologize. I should have mentioned this on Monday, so we could have had a little bit more information and maybe here as well. Are people familiar with what the whole scope of it is? Okay, it's extremely, it's ambitious. And I don't remember discussing it in a lot of detail, if at all, during the capital project and the CIP project. And let me look it up. Hold on just a minute, please. FC009.
Okay.
And so I was reading. So this is spend in 2018.
So primarily for next year, it's the carpet replacement in the main community hall. That's the biggest expense.
Okay, sorry, this just froze up. Adobe just crashed on me.
Oh, no.
But it talked quite a bit about pretty extensive connection of the pool and the community center, a long range. It's a very ambitious long-term capital investment. We just show some spending next year, though.
Yeah, so the only spending in 2018 is for carpet replacement. Everything else, all that ambitious work is just future forecasted into the future years of the CIP. It's not even in the adopted.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Okay.
And I would add that Park Strategic Plan, a smidge, and a future facilities master plan will help us to identify really what's needed, what's desired, and which years to try to slot that in. Right now, it's just lumped out into the future years. But the $500,000 for next year is for maintenance, carpet replacement, but it's a significant cost.
Right. So with the name of Community Center Phase 2, carpet doesn't strike me as the scope of a Phase 2 project, and I know that it's not. It's almost like this should be renamed. It really...
So what we're trying to do in the capital budget now is package things up so that you have
very packaged.
full idea about a particular facility or a particular park or a particular kind of program, maintenance program, or we put all the playgrounds together so you don't have this playground there and this playground there. We have a playground renovation program. So likewise, this is the community center CIP program.
Okay, I realize. Okay, so it is more of my beef is a little bit more just with the organization. We're talking about something like turf replacement, except it's carpet replacement. We didn't have a set aside or a reserve, all due once. It's not a lot of capital like is the ambition. This just feels quite different than a typical, like a Phase 2. So you said it's very expensive. So that's $500,000 for carpet and just on the main activity floor? Wow.
The last carpet lasted 20 years. That's what we got in there now. So if you take that over that length of time, or compare it to wood, and the reason we don't do wood is it's just much more, the carpet is much more flexible and inexpensive. That's what it costs.
How long will it take? How long would the facility be out of operation? Is this a weekend?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, and I would say that we also are exploring different options for what kind of flooring to put in there. It's not likely to be hardwood because that cost would be far more than what we budgeted here, but I think we're exploring other options other than just replacing the carpet with carpet. Okay. Other questions?
It's in the CIP, 2018 carpet replacements, future years. Talks about other, yeah, 30, okay. Have any other questions, Paul?
No, I don't.
Okay, do you, I think I'm going to ask this after each one. We have the option of deleting discuss separately and including it in a block. You want to. Paul, do you want to delete? Should we add that to the block vote? Okay. Okay, we'll vote separately. We'll wait. Paul, are you ready?
Hold on. I wanted to look at the funding for that.
The funding is
All
proposed to
REIT
come
one.
from REIT 1.
Anybody else have any opinions? I haven't heard anybody's thoughts.
I have no issue with it.
It's expensive, but it's maintenance, keeping things in good order. And it's a well-used facility.
Okay. Okay, if we have no more questions, we're going to vote on the community center. It's number 11 up there. Thumbs up means it's
Stays
stays
in the
as
budget.
is in the budget. Okay, 1, 2, 3, go. Okay, unanimous. Confluence Park, Bill?
Yeah, just want a little more, remind me of what we're doing now there, since we've done so much already. What's 140,000 for this year?
So if we had to point out the eyesore, what would come to mind? The Eck House primarily, right? So we're concerned that we may lose that if we don't start to think about how we're going to repurpose that. And Emily can talk a little bit more in detail on what's on the capital budget side. But the Eck House hasn't had any maintenance. It's been vacant for a long period of time. And it was originally, as part of the master site plan, going to be used for community purposes like cooking classes, other types of community events that were more on the social side rather than athletic types of events. And it's sitting there vacant, and it's been vacant there for a long time. So our concern is we don't do some things to rehab that building, we'll be asking you for a demolition earmark at some point. So we do have, in addition to this, it's not included in the budget, but $206,000 for Confluence Park in the state capital budget. So if the state approves the capital budget, we'll have an earmark of $206,000. It doesn't have any strings attached other than it has to be used for Confluence Park. So that could also be used longer term for this project, because this 106 doesn't get us all the way there to get it to that usable facility that we would need. Want to talk a little bit about what's in the CIP?
Sure. This amount was meant to be for design and construction documents for renovation of the Egg House.
So I guess my question would be, with the strategic plan coming and looking at what we're going to use that facility for or not, I mean, as demolition you mentioned is an option, I'm just not sure we know what we're doing with that yet, is starting to save that and renovate that.
Sure,
long range. I don't know what we're doing long range with that.
Although I would say we're operating under the guidance of the master plan for the park right now, and we're trying to execute on that plan.
That plan was adopted by the council.
2012.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Other questions? Ready to vote on it? Thumbs up means it stays.
We can roll into the next.
Well, it's faster to do this than have her delete than words, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, go. Right, it stays as is. Front Street, streetscape.
Okay, mine too. I pulled that because it's not funded. That needs to be funded in my mind, and I really am bothered that it's listed as the unfunded, one of the projects. That's one of my questions going back. Why are some things unfunded and some not? I think that needs to be part of the funded program. We're sitting on a promise there, and we're still sitting with a fairly empty street doing something. So I don't want it to be part of the unfunded program. I want it to be part of the funded program, and I don't know how to make that happen at this point in time, but that's what I'd like to do.
Comment?
Yeah.
I'm actually fine with this being part of the councilmanic bond. I'm okay with leaving it the way it is, funded by councilmanic bond.
That's the proposed funding, right?
The proposed funding is the temporary bond anticipation note.
I'm fine with it. Other questions? Yep, I'm waiting. I'm waiting.
This is just for 2018. That streetscape plan would leave much work uncompleted. I mean, quite a bit still. I think the entire budget, I'm looking at it, is $1.4 million, so this is $150,000. And then we're not planning anything for the next, well, nothing else is approved. It's not in the capital plan beyond next year.
That's correct. The remainder of this project that was identified is in those future years.
Right, and so this, the scope of this one, is just, it's nothing to do with Alder Street. 5 new, this is phase 1A, right? Is that what this would be? I'm just looking at the description. So, is this phase 1A or is it also inclusive of phase 1B? Because 1A is install 5 new trees, associated irrigation and water meter, and minimal street furniture between Sunset and Alder. So is that what this would do? And then nothing beyond that is, there's any funding consideration. That's just the plan.
So then I just need to say, because I did raise this issue earlier, and I do want to fund this, I just don't want it to be an unfunded project. And this is where that art part comes in, that I'm not sure why this one got totally left out and didn't fit into some of the other items that where it could have been funded, where to me it's a top priority. So I want it funded. I don't want it to be under councilmanic or a debt funding service. It doesn't seem appropriate to me when that's our priority and it's a promised project. It shouldn't be an unfunded project. So as it's presented, if we don't make any changes, I'm going to have to go against it because I don't want to fund unfunded projects at this point in time. So, but I would like to have it shifted to a funded program.
So
project.
It's funded. What I hear you saying is you don't like the proposed funding because it's part of the councilmanic
Correct.
bond. So, you have options. We have some like we talked about before, about $600,000 on the Atlas sale that isn't included in that. If you wanted to take it out of that fund, or if you wanted to take it out of the ending fund balance, this is just what the proposal is, based on the council direction to do the minimum scope that was included before. I think next year, when the mayor-elect starts, I think I'd like to have a conversation again with the council about the whole project, because I'm concerned about going in there and disrupting the downtown 3 times. I think we got enough cash in the ending fund balance, and I think the best thing to do would just be to go in and get the project done. But I obviously would need to talk to the mayor and think about how that would get done. But the less, especially for those small businesses that operate on relatively thin margins, to go in there and do construction 3 times doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So if you get in there and we know this is what we're going to do, if we're going to do it, other than, I think we were trying to figure out the name, the bed scramble, doesn't make that one. I think we would kind of leave out because I think there's still a lot of conversation that still needs to be had on that. But those other pieces, if there's a desire by council to talk a little bit about that, or even to reconsider that next year as part of the AB, I think it's worth the conversation. But to answer your question, if you don't like how it's proposed, you can always make a motion, obviously, to change how it's funded.
Bill or Paul?
I'll call it funding by councilmanic bond, and we were calling it unfunded. The land acquisition, given the type of land that it is, that made sense to me because historically that's what we've done. We've asked the public to make a special, we made a special ask to the public so that we could acquire sensitive and open space lands, especially in proximity of Issaquah Creek. So doing that with getting a loan to do that, it at least was consistent with past practice. The $1 million for Sammamish Road, fully recognize we don't know how that project is going to progress, and we could use it all or we could use none. There's probably more likely it'll be closer to the 0 side than it is the million side. We just don't know yet. So not committing funds to it right now, that makes sense to me as well. But I do like Bill's point about this one, and I am open to whether it be REIT or some other source, ending fund from general fund, of actually not tying this to a borrow, to a loan, to use some capital that we already have. And I think and do the project. You feel strongly one way, Bill?
So, and here's the art of it, where we're not quite as in with all the know that you all have, but it's a small amount of money. This is something we've committed to. We tore up that street and said we were going to do this, and now we've been sitting on it. We have to do at least this minimum. I'm very open to the discussion, next year of doing more, because I have no problem with that either. But for right now, I mean, I can suggest a fund, but maybe you could suggest one with a little more knowledge and background than I could, and I'm open to that. I just don't want it under a councilmanic.
I would suggest that for this, if we wanted an alternative source, that we would look at the general fund use of ending fund balance.
And you suggest that versus REIT or something? I'm sure it doesn't qualify under the mitigation fund. There's no other particular fund. It tied to all that work that we did, and all street and sewer and all that kind of water systems. That was all covered. So
that's right. That would be the proposed alternative, would be the general fund.
General fund or REIT, we could use either one.
I would recommend the general fund.
Okay, so I guess then I'll make a proposal that we change the funding for this to general fund.
I'll second that if it needs it, but I have a question for Jen. Last year when Paul was doing the strawman, we could always kind of see where we were on the different funds. And so is that linkage here this year?
I am going to show you after you're done with the deliberations, because that's what I've been doing.
Okay. Okay.
Well, then we get one more vote.
Okay. I'm actually fine with it being a councilmanic bond right now, so I'm probably not going to vote to change the.
I'm not either, I guess. There are going to be projects that are going to have to be funded with councilmanic bonds, and I don't know what makes it some projects better to fund that way and other projects not. And at some point, rather than going with feelings, I have to go sometimes with just the recommendation of the finance department. And we worked on the capital improvement plan for quite a while, and although it's new, I'm not finding a compelling reason to change it. You know, I acknowledge that you're not comfortable with it. I just don't understand what the reason is for changing it or what the benefit is.
So let me throw out one more idea, and that is, this is in the acceptable category, and I know I don't stick to those as Emily and I've talked, they're not real specific, but we have deferrable things that are definitely deferrable, and we're deciding to fund those and not fund acceptable items. So if you want to just pick on that way to look at it, that's another way to look at it. We have, you know, three items that are deferrable. Well, one's also, but we have an excavator and a radio console that we think is more important than this, in my mind, and I don't agree with that. So.
Well, we could also decide to take those two out. Just because they're on the list doesn't mean we have to figure out a way to fund them. We could also take them out. One of them we put in when we talked about earlier. So, but as the motion, I don't support the motion only because I don't. The reasons I said.
So I guess sitting here, I don't know what to do except ask you to take a thumbs up, thumbs down with my motion with the different funding source, and if that doesn't pass, then you go to the other one.
Sure, I was waiting for other council members to make comments if they wanted to. Anybody else? Mariah?
Well, I think that as we're kind of breaking some of these apart and discussing them separately. However, if there was a councilmanic bond, would that, you know, that could add several of these projects together. So it's sort of a complicated decision in regard to just where I'm Front Street streetscape. I think that would be a great project to go forward, but I'm just hesitating on the source.
Other comments? Ready to vote on the motion? The motion is to change the source of the funds from councilmatic for this project to general, was it general fund, Bill?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, so vote up means that you support the motion. Okay, 1, 2, 3, go. Okay, it's 2 to 4. Is that right? 3.
It's 3 to 3.
3, sorry. What happens on a tie?
Well, so.
I thought, yeah, ties fail. So, well, it's Robert's rules. I didn't pick the rule. Okay, so then we're back to the main proposal, which is the project is included, and the funding would be councilmanic bonds. So thumbs up means that it stays as in the budget as proposed, funded by councilmanic bonds. Okay, 1, 2, 3, go. Okay. 5-1?
5-1.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Why does it say street capital?
Because the project is expensed out of the street capital fund.
All right, park master planning. Paul, I think that was yours.
I've heard more tonight. When Emily was talking about the community center phase 2 carpet replacement, the idea through Monday, if you'd asked me about the title of that item, which is Parks Master Plan, you know, that's a discrete event which I saw concluding, I assumed was going to be concluding. And these clearly are, just like in the water system plan, a water treatment plant is an outcome. It's a suggested outcome. And I believe that we're going to be taking policy action on all of those. And so I wish that if we made an adjustment, I think there are projects that are discrete. I think I would take this as one where the bundling is we can improve upon. Because again, it is a maintenance and there's no plan work, no other capital plan, and a very significant, ambitious plan of connecting buildings that are on 2 different elevations today between the pool, for example, and the community center that's in this. I think that the idea of having it as a separate item, that's more of a categorization thing, and that's why I pulled it out. I didn't understand why we're planning that way. So I haven't heard a lot. I'm inclined to want to do maintenance, preventative maintenance. Yeah, it's going to get even more use, the community center, because we're going to open it up on Sundays. And it gets a lot of use from a wide range of age groups and a lot of different activities. So I'm definitely in favor of the maintenance, but I'm taking this opportunity to make a comment for the record for the future. I just think the way we're organizing this project should change.
Are you ready to, any other comments? No?
Just a little more clarification. You're saying this project should change. I'm not sure I'm understanding what.
Yeah, this is not community center phase 2. This is community center carpet replacement.
I thought we
phase
were
2 is
we're on Park Master Planning. We're on number 2.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I got my everything conflated there.
That's why I'm confused.
Everything got conflated there. Sorry. I'm sorry. Forgive me. It really is the same. In my mind, it's the same issue, where there is a master plan. I started out talking about that being really discrete, and I switched in the middle. There's going to be specific recommendations out of that, and I think from a capital planning perspective, I think we should take those type of discrete. I think there's the master planning, and then there's discrete projects. They could be quite diverse and out of a master plan. So, and I think so it's the same argument. I just think the way that we're organizing those, maybe they're too rolled up. That's really what that is more than anything. I still expect out of this that we're going to get, I think Jeff said by March, the strategic plan will make its way to council, and that it's anticipated that these are going to be recommendations out of this. And I'm assuming there'll still be further legislative action required to do those projects. So, all going to come in front of us again anyway. I'm not sure why we're doing this in this operational budget, because we're going to vote on the funding anyway separately. Yeah.
You ready to vote? You have other questions? Chew. Yeah? Okay. So a thumbs up means it is in the budget as proposed. 1, 2, 3, go. Unanimous. All right, water treatment plant. Very quickly.
Okay. Either you can go right.
I was kidding because it's the water treatment plant. I was joking.
No, I just think we had this discussion last year about water system plan, water treatment plant. Wanted to see the water system plan before we started spending money on the water treatment plant. We're going to do the water system plan this year, but we didn't have the capacity to do it, and now we have the two butted up together again. I don't have a problem with having them both in the same year, but I do have a concern of spending money to begin to design something that the council hasn't even seen a draft of the water system plan. So it could be something covered in the council president's letter that says that both were approved, but the expectation is that the water system plan draft is presented to city council before designing when it is expended. But anyway, throw that out there for an idea.
I think I would I think I would take it one step further, and I would feel, I support taking it out. I know it was in the capital improvement plan, but we just have not had any conversation about it, except in passing. I know Sheldon mentioned that decisions, land use decisions, growth decisions, whatever you want to call them, have driven the policy, and that's not good enough for me. I think there are a lot of issues that we have to talk about. There are issues, it's a sensitive issue. It's going to be whether or not to mix Lower Valley aquifer water for Valley users with regional water. It's going to be about fluoride. It's going to be a lot of things. And I think I'm not comfortable sending the message that this policy decision has more or less been made. I'm just not comfortable. It's a very large decision and a very sensitive one.
+1.
Mariah?
So the water planning in general, is there money set aside, and how much money is set aside?
200,000?
Okay.
For the water system plan update.
But this is separate.
This is separate.
And called the water treatment plant.
Yep.
Which is really specific. Treatment plant, yes.
So.
Yep. Okay.
Anybody else have questions?
Okay.
Thank you. You ready to?
Questions?
You ready to vote? So.
I was just going to clarify with the vote.
Yeah, I try to do that each time. So a thumbs up means you leave it in. Thumbs down, take it out. Okay? 1, 2, 3, go. It's unanimous. Northwest Sammamish Road.
Okay, I guess that's mine, because it's, to me, that's another
the
councilmatic
unfunded, sure.
unfunded one.
Yeah.
So, again, I don't want to be in my high horse forever, but I guess, I think things have been said, this probably won't get spent this year, more than likely. I just don't see that really happening. I support looking at that and continue our work with WashDOT and working to make this all happen, but I don't want to put $1 million of unfunded debt into this year's budget. So if something came up in October, November, and we need to do something, I'm sure it would come before us and we'll take action and deal with it then. So that's, I'd say, I don't support this at this point in time.
Tell me how this mechanism works again. Bob, you explained it earlier in the evening. But it sounds like even though we might, I interpreted what you said, that we might go borrow the money anyway. But and if I heard that wrong, tell me, because I wish it would be like, hey, we can see it coming, and this point in late in the year, here's this need for us, and I'm making this up, right? Show good faith, put something in, get something up front. I'm not sure how fast it can be, but tell me when we would actually make the commitment to the funds if we kept it as a loan, as a borrow.
So bond anticipation note is essentially the city is planning on issuing a bond, which is typically a 20-year bond. And so, you typically wouldn't do $1 million, $1.5 million bond. So what you're saying is, okay, in anticipation of some future major issuance by the city, we are borrowing, from a cash flow perspective, money for a period of time. So typically, if we know we're going to issue a much larger note at some point down the road, issuing a band essentially is, and interest is so cheap right now, you're probably looking at, 2% for 1 year, if not less than that?
For a smaller
For a
note,
$1.5 million note?
It would be two.
2.5.
2.5 maybe, and just to be on the conservative side to give you a perspective.
So it's really saying, okay, we've got some expenses planned, and that's the way to fund it. You go to a bank, they generally would do the loan. In this case, some type of bank fund, bank.
We'd likely place this privately with the banks. That's the more favorable, typical trend. It's similar to the last portion of the bonds where we privately placed and got very favorable rates.
So like a balloon mortgage, the balloon is in a year you have to pay back the debt, whatever you borrowed for that 1 year. Now what you typically do is you just renew the ban. So you have to pay the interest on it. That's the only financial commitment that the expense that gets made by the city for that year is whatever the interest ends up being. And then you can roll over again with another ban the following year, or you could roll it into a much larger note. Generally, your bond counsel would say, if you're going to do a ban, you probably want to issue a note within 5 years after that. You don't want to sit there and, although there's nothing illegal to doing that, it's an option, but it's certainly, you typically like to kind of tie it into a larger note. You have another option, which is you could just borrow from a fund, and we've done that before, so utility fund or fleet fund, and we just have to pay that fund back over a period of time. One that we used to do a lot up until about 2012, 2013 was the LID, the LID Guarantee Fund. Yep. And so that's an option too. And that way, essentially, we're just paying ourselves the interest rather than a bank the interest.
Okay, so my question, thank you for all of that. My question included the timing of that.
Yeah.
I mean, why would we commit to $1 million if we don't know we're going to expend it this year?
So what we do know is that WashDOT is doing the auxiliary lane projects in 2019, 2020. And so there's going to be design work that'll have to get done next year. What I can't tell you is how much. Because we still have to work out with WashDOT what the scope of the project's going to be, and then how that may work. So they were looking at bidding the project as design build. So it would really be, scoping the work that would fit within that design build. The only real risk is we don't know for sure. We have an estimate, I think, of what it's going to cost, but at the end of the day, till the bids come in on the design build, we don't really fully know what the final calculation is going to end up being.
If I could add that if there is a timing issue that we find out once we have more information about this particular project, then that would come back to the council in the form of a budget amendment to make sure that we had the right dollars in authorization for this fund.
In lieu of doing it today?
Well, today was based on council direction at the adoption of the capital budget, and so
I'm just trying to understand your last comment. Was that an alternative in lieu of this? What's in the budget?
Well, that would be the amending once we know more about this project.
Just for the amount.
Correct. Yes.
So I just, I wanted to give some background about the $1 million being put in the budget for Northwest Sammamish Road. This, the point for me in regard to bringing this up is that all of the neighborhoods that exist along that road for years and years. I've been hearing the residents talk about how dangerous that road can be, and that there's no real connection for pedestrians, for bicyclists, and it's very dangerous. So you have several different neighborhoods that exist on that road. They're really close to the park. They, would love to ride bikes themselves or let their kids ride their bikes or be able to walk down that street, but it's just too narrow and too dangerous. So WashDOT is coming in and they're doing work on I-90, and the point of this is that it is coming forward, and I really would like to see money set aside for that particular part of the project, because to me, that's just something that could get lost, and I really don't want to see that get lost. The $1 million was a placeholder. If there is some sort of estimate or even ballpark that's come forward that is a different amount, as if there could be a placeholder to start the design and to have that be a part of the conversation, then I would love to hear that. Did you say, Bob, that there is some sort of estimate out there?
Well, so what's in the
Ballpark-ish?
capital budget? Do you have that? Yeah.
We know what they're going to
Yeah, because so the challenge is, what's the final scope kind of look like and what that design is. I don't have a better number for you right now. I think, I do know it probably isn't $1 million, but it's, we do need some money to be able to start the engineering and the understanding of what the scope of the project is. And then we'll know, once that's done, what the final number is going to be. Yeah. But the $1 million, I know this, that the council directed us to put $1 million into the budget, and $1 million should cover that initial kind of engineering and work affiliated with that. And working with WashDOT, yeah.
You were talking about the councilmanic bonds and the low interest rate right now, and what's a typical amount? Or is there a typical amount for one of those bonds? Were you saying that they're typically higher than $1 million, more like 1.5 or 2? Or
for a ban or for a long-term
Well,
debt?
just bonds in general, they're more attractive to bidders if it's a bigger issue. And so the reason that we say that a larger issue and why we are proposing the anticipation note is because the amount for 2018 that we identified as being unfunded and is a small amount. And so, we typically you're going to look at something over $5 million. There isn't any right answer for that, but from past experience, you'd want to get over the $5 million. You want to, over 7, 10 million are really attractive issues. But definitely, the larger you go, the more bidders you get, and the larger the bidder. So then that starts to reduce your interest rate, and that's where you get those favorable. Those in a favorable market. So we would see that with larger. That's why the strategy or the art to this is what's coming up next that's coming up fast, and that's why the 5-year plan is in place that identifies these potential projects coming up in the next year that we would want to package up and see some more favorable rates.
And so if there was a partnership developed and it did not end up costing that amount of money, would that money stay with that project, or if it was within one of these bonds, or it would go to the next set of priorities in terms of transportation projects?
If the estimate for the overall project changed, or for this part of the project, then we would adjust the multi-year project detail accordingly, and that would come to the council. And so at that time, then yes, the amount for the bond issue could go up or down. But right now, it's earmarked for this particular project.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
So we really need 2 things. One, we need some level of appropriation of money, so we got spending authority. I think the thing is, by the end of the year or next year, we'll know exactly what the project's going to cost. Well, I shouldn't say that. Until the bids are done, we'll know exactly what the project's going to cost, but we'll have a good estimate of what the project costs. So it may not even be until October or November where council would have to issue a ban because it really is a matter of cash flow. So, if we got sufficient cash to handle those expenses, we can do that. Then the question is you just replenish your cash and whatever those funds are. But you can't do that at all unless you've got the authority that the council provides in appropriating the money. So that's why we thought a ban is the best way to do it right now, because what it may end up, because it essentially gives us the appropriation and the spending authority, but we don't necessarily. It may be that by October we'll know exactly what it costs, and we'll come to you and say it's going to be $7 million. I'm just making up a number. Okay, it's going to cost $7 million, and that is something we would recommend that you do a bond issuance on, and you roll in whatever else the council may want to do in addition to that project. So this is just a placeholder. Typically, a ban is to cover your cash flow.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So again, I guess just a reminder that this was definitely council direction. You all didn't come up with this. It was put in here from us telling you to put it in here. So
yes, the $1 million.
The $1 million. Yes, $1 million was a direction from us. So.
Bobby, you've been using I assume it's an acronym, ban?
Sorry, it's a ban, so a bond anticipation note.
Ban, B-A-N.
Yes.
Bond anticipation, okay, a
yes.
ban. Okay. What you just said included any work you could fund out of cash flow. The only reason I'm questioning this is this idea, you also used the word earlier, the word set aside. So why would we go borrow some money and set it aside, not knowing how much we're going to need or when we're going to need it? That's what I was trying to avoid. So in execution, from an administrative perspective, if we were to approve this at $1 million, it doesn't mean that you're going to go get a ban for $1 million.
That's great.
You're telling me you would manage this, and you try to manage it out of cash flow, and knowing that you had this approval, and then at some point, like you said, it could be later in the year where you actually then go borrow the money and we start paying interest on something because we've got it committed. Mm-hmm. And that's what I didn't want to do, is borrow it, set it aside, start paying interest, and we're not using it. That's what I've been trying to understand. Thank you.
Questions? Ready to vote? Yeah? Right. This is the number 36, correct?
Correct.
Thumbs up is that it will be as proposed.
That's correct.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, go.
Get this project started.
Okay.
I just want to take a count, please.
5-1.
5-1, thank you.
Lakeside and sensitive land purchases. This was part of yours, Bill? This is Council Manic. Isn't it? Or am I?
It's
both.
It's two things.
Okay.
It is 250 from King County, assumed. I don't think it's earmarked yet. We have to have a county council person who wants to give it to us, and then $500,000 from bond.
That's correct.
So it was in the bond one.
Okay, excuse me, so the 750,000 confused me there for a second because I was looking at 500,000. So that's including other money. So again, this is a desirable project. It's on the top of the list, and yet it's showing as an unfunded councilmanic bond. Again, it's the same problem I'm having with other ones. This needs to be a funded thing if that's what we're going to do, and we are pretty sure this is going to happen. You know, this is a pretty sure deal. So I think we should fund it and not set it up as a non-funded bond.
Given that it's, again, I'm to repeat myself from what I said earlier, we have a practice of acquiring sensitive lands using borrowed money. That way, the benefactors in the future who start getting benefits from the land are also part of paying for it as well. So to me, this is okay that part of this is funded by a bond because it follows that past practice.
Other comments, questions? You ready to vote? All right, thumbs up. It's in the budget as proposed. 1, 2, 3, go. 5-1.
Providence Point.
Providence Point intersection. Okay. Who brought this one? Okay, Mariah?
So could I get an explanation just of the 150,000, just?
Design?
Yeah, it's the last increment to take the design from,
Update the design process.
yeah, it's 90% complete.
And this is already in the budget?
Any other questions about it? Did you take a vote? Okay, you all know what we're doing? 1, 2, 3, go. Okay,
Street
6-0.
mitigation fund.
what? And then, so the last, I believe, is that the last vote that we vote on the remainder of the capital projects that were not discussed separately, and
That's correct.
are you agreeable to vote on them as a block? Yeah? Right. The remaining capital projects that haven't been voted on, if you vote for a thumbs up means they're all, you approve them as proposed in the budget. Okay, 1, 2, 3, go. Unanimous.
Spent $40 million.
One thumb.
Okay.
Okay. We have other things, or is that it?
Yeah.
I'm just doing a quick review here.
Ensure that we've done what we're supposed to do. We did that.
Yeah, we had a note that said that this one was
Well, the last-
deferred.
Deferred. We have more votes?
That was the notes that I put here in the comments.
That's the one, it got deferred from last time, so there wasn't necessarily a vote on whether to, the revenue's included in the budget, if I remember right. So
This is
the tech fee for like Parks and Recreation.
Yeah, this is the revenue
So we have to vote on whether we want
to keep that.
to charge a new tech fee. Okay? But
Was there an argument against? I don't recall.
it's just a new fee. So you're asking us, as a separate line item, vote on it because it's a new fee. Now, would we have, do we technically have to do this?
You don't have to charge a new fee, you would just.
No, I mean, vote on it.
No, you technically don't. We would.
If we approve the budget,
Yeah, now, actually, so there's no fee schedule,
That's correct.
so it wouldn't require a separate ordinance. But it would have to get embedded somewhere
Yes.
in the code. You got
Yes,
it?
we,
Okay.
yes, we would have to.
Okay, so there would have to be like a separate agenda bill with an ordinance or something
That's correct.
that would roll it into that. So that would be just, so you don't have to do anything, you could leave it as is, and then you would, essentially in Council President letter, direct us to prepare the ordinance and take that to council for authorization to include the fee.
okay, what's your pleasure? Sounds like works. That works. Okay. Council President letter.
Okay, Here's what I wanted to do, because I wanted to show you my cool math skills.
Is that the last vote?
It is. I just wanted to make sure I got all of the blocks. I got, it is everything that was on the published highlights list. I'm going to So, I'm going to pull up another quick file just to show you that we've been tracking what has changed. And here we go. Oh, we're going to do read only. So what I'm showing here is in the budget, there is the summary of the 18 revenues, expenditures, and impact on fund balance. We see the proposed budget for revenues and the proposed expenditures in the mayor's budget. These two columns were city council adjustments. I'm just going to show you some quick behind the scenes because you will see this. For each fund, I've been tracking what you changed, those blue items, and the finance team and administration will make sure that what we have tonight is flowing through from an accounting and fund accounting perspective. And so you can see that there were some, over the course of your deliberations, there was some add to the expenditures for these items, and then an add, this is the general fund here. You can see each of the funds that the budget highlighted items pertain to are here. So this is all, I've been updating this as we've been talking. And so what you'll see here is a summary council adjustment. And so, for example, the general fund from the proposed budget that had a budgeted increase in fund balance, the changes that were made through the council's direction would be to utilize $393,988, a decrease in ending fund balance. You can see that this is the estimated ending fund balance. This is a fluid number because of this. We will be updating that based on a snapshot in our financials. And so you can see the ending reserve amount would likely end at about 33% of general fund expenditures for 2018. You can see all funds that were impacted from council deliberations. So a total of an increase in expenditures of 1.4 million, an increase in revenue sources of 333,000.
Questions?
Just note real quickly, so the net of what we did today, coming into today, because today's packet had updated numbers in it as well, were those updated for what actions we had already taken?
That's correct.
So we actually came in today with an increase of 435,000 in revenue, so now we actually took something away. But we added about 400,000 in expenditures. Mm-hmm. Coming into today, we're spending down, we were using ending fund balance of around 320,000 in the general fund. So we added a little bit more to that if you just go back to that main sheet. That's 393, it was 318 coming into the day, so about 75. All right, thank you.
So what we'll do is we'll review and make sure that we have reconciled, and then the next step is that we would prepare the final budget ordinance exhibit, which is what you're looking at here, as well as the council president's letter. And that's something that we'll work on and get that prepared for the packet for Monday night.
And send it to me first?
Correct. Oh, yes, correct. Yeah. We work on it together.
Right. So the next step is we have our hearing was continued. I don't know if you call it that. No, is that right? The public hearing on Monday was continued. to Monday, and then we have the budget, vote on the budget, actually adopt it on Monday. Okay. Anything else? Thanks for all your work. This has been a long process. All right, nothing else. We are adjourned. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody else.